stanął. Przecież tu będzie najlepiej.
Dobra. To jeszcze chwilkę poczekamy.
Nie, no jasne. Ja tylko mówię, gdzie jest najlepsze miejsce oświetleniowe.
Działa? No, to mamy komplet głosowej. Miło Was jeszcze raz, no, na świat, na media. Miło powitać jest Ralfa Goff, byłego szefa placówki CIA. I myślę, my jesteśmy już po lunchu, po niezwykle interesującej rozmowie. I myślę, że to dla nas wszystkich będzie ciekawie wysłuchać, co Ralf nam dzisiaj powie. Ale również witam gości ze świata rządu, z instytucji finansowych, również z biznesu, przedstawicieli Palestry i również wszystkich innych zaangażowanych w tą konferencję. Także poproszę Ralf. It will be a pleasure to meet you and to hear once again what you can say about the economy situation right now in this time. So, please, thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for having me here today. I always enjoy visiting Poland. I've been coming here the last couple of years on my way in and out of Ukraine. I have to say, from the very start, I've been impressed by the incredible infrastructure, the warmth of the people, even in the cold and gray, which I love here, the good food, the good nature of the people that I've met. And particularly when I come back from Ukraine, I always feel a little sense of relief when I cross that border and I'm back under the NATO umbrella, as it were. So I thank you for that. My talk today, I kind of called it the battlefield, the boardrooms, and the bureaucrats, because these are, I think, areas of interest to you in what's going on next door. First of all, there's great danger in Ukraine, but there's great potential, particularly for a country like Poland, which I had some conversations last night with some of your countrymen in the Institute of Leadership, and they asked me for my opinion of like Poland and its role in the world, its role in Europe, and I said I see one of great potential for leadership. All right, you look at what's happening in France, you look at what's happening in Germany, the old leaders of Europe, right, and the UK, which is no longer in Europe, and which it's struggling to identify what does it mean to be a Brit today, right? The French are heading into some uncertain political era. The Germans are emerging from decades of guilt and decades of focusing on their economy, and now they have to focus on their military for the first time. Meanwhile, Poland, here, this country, you have developed steadily and quickly, I have to say, and I view you as a true frontline state, both in the terms of the confrontation with Russia and also in the greater confrontation that we're viewing between the West and the East, between China and Europe. And the war in Russia and Ukraine, it's more than just a war between two states. It's a war between two systems of values. Right? I mean, look who's on the Russian side. It's North Korea, it's Iran, and China. How'd you like to go to that dinner party? Right? Meanwhile, the non-aligned states, countries like South Africa, India, Brazil, right, long list there, they're watching. And they're watching this conflict of values to decide in the future where are they going? Whose side are they going to be on? And so, you know, you look at the conflict in Ukraine, and, you know, personally, I don't think we can allow the Ukrainians to lose to the Russians for a lot of reasons. But we, as enlightened Western cultures, we can't afford to let the Ukrainians lose to Russia, because these other countries will start deciding which side to go, and it won't be on ours. So there's a huge danger there. And I would encourage you as Poles to consider a greater role for Poland in the future, a role of leadership, not just following NATO, not just being a member of NATO, but you have the opportunity to be a true, I think, leading force in NATO. The war in Ukraine also, you know, the Russians have declared war on us, but we haven't declared war on them. And look no further than the events of the other day with the attack on your rail system. Right? We've had these sabotage attacks for the last 4 years. And how has NATO responded? They've done nothing. Right? Vladimir Putin is a guy who he's very adept at pushing the limits and testing the limits. Right now, the overflight of drones over your airspace, the attacks on your rail system, the attacks on shopping centers, the destruction of cables under the Baltic Sea, these are all tests. Right? They're testing the will of NATO to push back. And so far, NATO has failed. We haven't pushed back. We don't even seize the ships that destroy these cables in the Baltic, or the ships that carry illegal Russian oil. Right? They have free passage of the seas. Stuff like that's got to change. Or Putin, you know, he's like any child. For those of you who are parents, children test their parents all the time. They test the limits of allowance. And if you don't say no to your children, they grow up to be very willful. And that's what's happening with Putin. There's a joke going around in Ukraine right now, and it kind of sums up some of it, where these two Russian guys are sitting in a bar drinking shots of vodka, like Russians do. And they start talking. One of them says, hey, Sasha, are you following our war with NATO? And Sasha says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you know, we're fighting NATO, and it's not going so well. We've lost 1 million men. We've lost thousands of tanks. Our Air Force has had heavy losses. Our Black Sea fleet has been driven into the corner of the Black Sea. It's horrible. And Sasha says, well, what's happened to NATO? And he says, well, that's the funny part. NATO hasn't even started to fight. And that's what we're viewing here. You know, the Russians have declared war on NATO, and NATO has yet to respond and declare war on Russia, which isn't going to happen over Ukraine. But Putin's testing us. I'm not one of those who believes, I know your commander ground forces, I think, recently announced that Putin was paving the way for an attack on NATO. I don't think he's quite there yet. On the other hand, if he continues these probes, if he continues this sabotage, and there's no price to be paid, what's to stop him from considering to go even further? Ever since the start of the war, Putin has overcome and this is the bureaucrats' part, Putin has instilled fear, I think it's an irrational fear, in the West over nuclear war. Right, the Biden administration, in particular the former National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has admitted, I think in a book that he's writing, that he was petrified of nuclear warfare. How do you make policy out of fear? You can't make a policy out of fear. And that extended to the way we treated the war in Ukraine. From the very start, the American administration planned for defeat, not for victory. Right? We closed our embassy before a single shot had been fired. What kind of signal did that send to Putin? And then we followed that up by not providing armament to the Ukraine. Right? There was a huge intelligence failure. The U.S. intelligence community got one thing right, and they've been dining out on that for years. They said, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And they were right. The Russians came. But what they really screwed up was how bad the Russian army was and how capable the Ukrainian army was. And I think that had a huge effect on the policy because it created an atmosphere where the West just assumed that the Ukrainians would last 3 days. Remember early in the war, all that talk about 3 days? Right? So the West planned from the start, planned for defeat, not for victory. Horrible mistake. And as far as nuclear war, I've never believed that Putin was willing to go that far. This is a guy who was afraid of COVID. Right? Remember the pictures of him during the COVID times sitting? I mean, he wouldn't even enter a room this small. Right? He would sit at a table, and the guys in the meeting would be at the other end of the room. Right? And that's after 2 weeks of quarantine. He was deathly afraid of COVID. And I would think that someone if their first concern is their own health and well-being, doesn't strike me as the type of person to play nuclear poker. So I'm just not buying it. Now the irony is, over the years, as the Ukrainians have crossed one red line after another, right? First it was, well, we can't send HIMARS, right, the long-range artillery. We can't send HIMARS to the Ukrainians because then Putin will go nuclear. Didn't happen. Well, we can't send them F-16 jets because Putin will go nuclear. Didn't happen. We can't send him ATACMS, he'll go nuclear. Didn't happen. Right? The Ukrainians have crossed every red line, and Putin has not responded that way. Another example, in my opinion, the famous train that runs between Warsaw and Kiev. Right? All the politicians of the West love to be on that train and get pictures taken, show how brave they are going to the front. Right? It's never been hit by the Russians. Why is that? If that train is such an important link, right, why hasn't it been hit? And my theory is because he's afraid if he hits it on the wrong night, he's going to kill the Prime Minister of Denmark or the Defense Minister of Norway. And then he's got to deal with NATO. So he doesn't want that confrontation, in my opinion. Right? So the train hasn't been hit. So as an intelligence officer, I look at these little indicators, and my assessment is he's not ready for nuclear war. And meanwhile, we have this undeclared war, or I should say this undeclared war from Russia on NATO, no responses to us. And then we get to the part of the boardrooms, investment. In the beginning, a lot of American companies rushed to Ukraine in the war, right? Because they wanted to sell stuff. They wanted to sell their products. Anduril with their drones, right? Raytheon with missiles. All sorts of companies were there. And in this new battle, the Ukrainians generally came back within 24 to 48 hours and said, your stuff doesn't work. Warfare has changed. The technology has changed, right? So a lot of American companies left. And then on top of that, they were disencouraged to invest because they were unsure of American policy. The Trump administration went from in the initial phases, their policy towards Ukraine was hostility, open hostility to the Ukrainians. Right? President Trump was not a big fan of Zelensky. He was not a big fan of Ukraine. You know, he was mad at Zelensky over the stuff with trying to pin corruption on Joe Biden, and Zelensky wouldn't help him, so he was angry about that. And he was angry with Ukraine because this war was a distraction for him. Right? When he first came in, he said, I will stop this war in 24 hours. If I was president, this war would have started. I think there's a little truth to the second statement, but not to the first, as we all know. Right? Because I remember when he was first elected, my friends in Ukraine were freaking out. Oh my God, this guy's going to come in. He's not going to aid us. He's going to side with Putin. And I remember telling him to calm down. I said, here's what's going to happen. He's going to come in. Trump is going to come in and find out he can't stop the war in 24 hours. Then he's going to get angry because he likes to get his way. And he's going to turn his anger on you, on Ukraine, because you're right there and it's easy. And he did. We're all, I think, familiar with the horrible meeting in the White House, right, with President Zelensky getting in an argument with the President of the United States on TV. And I said, he's going to get mad at you, but you're going to take it because you don't have any choice. Right? And what happened? They came up with the mineral deal and a couple other things, smoothed it all out. Relations were actually pretty good between President Trump and President Zelensky. I said, and the next phase will be he's going to try and convince Putin that, hey, you know, Vladimir, my friend, we need to stop this war. It's horrible. It's killing lots of people. Let's stop it together, you and I. And because Vladimir Putin has no intention of stopping this war, he's not going to do it. And now Trump's going to get angry at him, which is where we're at today. With just 2 weeks ago, with the president announcing the new sanctions on the Russian gas and oil companies, right? Which has really upset Putin. Putin's first reaction was, go ahead, sanction us, we don't care. But what did he do behind the scenes? Behind the scenes, he sent one of his top negotiators, Kirill Dmitriev, to the United States for a bunch of meetings that went nowhere. And then on top of that, he started cozying up to the Maduro regime in Venezuela. You know, now we have this situation where the United States has been sinking Venezuelan ships, allegedly carrying drug traffickers, Tren de Aragua or something like that as a group. And the Russians look at that, and Vladimir Putin now sees an opportunity to put pressure on the United States. Right? We've put pressure on the Russians in Armenia with peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We put pressure on the Russians in Syria by cozying up with the Syrian president. I mean, just last week you had the president of Syria, a former al-Qaeda senior operative, someone I used to have on my list when I was working in the Middle East. It wasn't a nice list, and he was right at the top. He was in the White House having meetings. Right? Another sign of Russia losing influence in the region. Last week the president had the 5 presidents of Central Asia from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, from the Central Asia in the United States, right? And this is the backyard of Russia. So Putin's reaction now is to try and hit us in our backyard by having new agreements with Venezuela. And one of the things I fear, if President Trump doesn't move fast to get rid of the Maduro regime, which is, admittedly, it's an illegal regime. He stole the elections, right? Took power by force, holds power by force. But we have a chance to see a replay of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Russia has already sent some Wagner mercenaries there. He's also sent air defense weaponry to Venezuela with Russian crews. And now he's threatening to send these Oreshnik missiles, these hypersonic missiles, which are offensive weapons, to Venezuela as well. So, you know, in my opinion, President Trump needs to do something quickly before this escalates to a global confrontation between the United States and Russia, which I also think Putin doesn't really want. But Putin can be a very calculated, pragmatic actor, but sometimes he loses his temper. And I think on this one, on Venezuela, I think he lost his temper over the new sanctions from Trump. The war itself on the ground in Ukraine, I say this with great regret, and a lot of my Ukrainian friends get very upset when I do, but they're slowly losing. Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, right? Before the war, they had about 42 million people. They're down now in the 30s, 36 million, 37 million because of refugees and people leaving. Russia has 140 some odd million. The only good news is the Russian population is declining even faster. So there's some good news there at least. Also, the Ukrainians, they don't draft, the draft age is 24 to 60. Not the 18 to 24, they can volunteer, and they have to sign up, but they don't have to serve unless they volunteer. And President Zelensky, when asked by President Trump, why aren't you sending your teenagers like everybody else, he said, we're trying to save them for the future of our country. So he's thinking in a post-war term. And that resonates with me, and I have spoken to people on the front, commanders on the front, and asked them, well, what do you think about this, that these 18-year-olds to 24 don't have to come to the front? And they, almost every single one I asked supported that. They said, we could use the more manpower, but I want these kids to survive, to rebuild my country when we finish this war. It's a very noble sentiment. Right? But in the meantime, and I think it was your prime minister who put it best about the need for Europe to stand up, because there was two gifts in this war. The first gift was President Putin, with his bloody attack on Ukraine, has really made them realize their identity. Before the war, Ukrainian identity, yeah, there was Ukrainian pride and stuff like that, but it wasn't what it is today. Right? Ukrainians really have a sense of national identity now, even the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. I spend a lot of time in the East, Kharkiv, and those places where it's all Russian-speaking for the most part, or majority Russian-speaking. They identify as Ukrainians, and that's Putin's gift to Ukraine. Donald Trump has given a gift to the Europeans. Some might not agree with that, but by threatening to turn his back on NATO, by threatening in the future that maybe America won't be there, Europe has had the wake-up call that maybe they have to do it themselves. When President Trump was asked why he didn't put sanctions on Russia after the Alaska summit, his response was, well, I'll put sanctions on Russia as soon as Europe stops buying Russian gas and oil. He kind of has a fair point there. Because in the last few years, the Europeans have weaned themselves off gas and oil from Russia, but not enough. They're still paying more money for gas and oil into the Russian economy than they're paying in donations to Ukraine to fight the war. All right, that's got to be reversed. So that's more of the boardroom stuff, the money stuff. At the front, too, I heard an interesting comment from some commanders that their men had captured Russian soldiers on the front line who, 12 days before, had been sitting at home as civilians. Right? Russia has a general mobilization, but they only mobilize their young, like 18, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. They don't send them to the war. There's still a law in the Russian system where the new conscripts can only be based somewhere in Russia, and they stick to that for the most part. So their military is made up mostly of volunteers, millions of volunteers. They can recruit about, I believe it's like 1,000 new recruits a day, so 30,000 a month, and they pay them. And most of them come from the poorer parts of Russia. They come from all these different republics of different ethnicities, of Turkic peoples, of Asian peoples, right? Where their birth rates actually are much higher than the birth rates in Moscow amongst Russians. Putin has shielded the elites. He's shielded the cities of Moscow and Leningrad, St. Petersburg, excuse me, and several other cities. He's shielded them from the draft because he knows that if those people go to war, if the children of the elite go to war and start getting killed in large numbers, he's going to have a political problem. Right? So now he's resorting on these people who are coming from the far-flung republics where there's very few economic opportunities, where you either are an unemployed alcoholic living in Bashkortostan, or you're taking a gamble with your life on the front lines in Ukraine. But these guys are signing up, and within 10 days, they're being sent to the front. And this is all part of Putin's strategy of using, everyone's heard the horrible saying of the meat assaults, right? And they're working. This is why Ukraine is losing, because Vladimir Putin has shown that he doesn't care how many men get killed. 2 years ago, if someone had told me, hey, Russia's going to lose like over 1 million men in this conflict, I would have laughed. That's ridiculous. Nobody loses. In this day and age, nobody sends 1 million men to their deaths without some sort of political repercussions. Yet here we are. All right? And unfortunately, due to the current conditions, there's really no end in sight. I was at a conference where Keith Kellogg, one of the senior negotiators for the US government, was at, and he was speaking. And he assured everyone in the crowd that they were 90% of the way towards some sort of peace talks. 90% of the way. And we said, well, what's the other 10%? And he said, Putin. Right? It's all up to Vladimir Putin. And look, if he's going to blow up railways in Poland, destroy internet cables undersea in the Baltics, support African regimes in Africa with the new Africa Corps, right? If he's going to try to assassinate like the head of Rheinmetall in Germany, right? These are all acts of war, which certainly don't show me that he has any intention to negotiate. At present, the dilemma facing the West is how do we force that last 10%? How do we get Vladimir Putin to the table? And if anyone in here can answer that, please tell me, because I don't have an answer to that. But I would say, with the Trump administration now having scared Europe, right? One of my friends joked, he said, yeah, the Europeans are going to find out now why they have free health care and we don't, because they're going to have to spend their money on the military. But they're stepping up, but not enough. Europe's economy is 11 times the size of that of Russia's. So clearly they can spend more than Russia. It's a question of political will and priorities. The US, meanwhile, as I said earlier, the Trump administration was hostile to Ukraine. Now they're ambivalent, right? There won't be any embracing or hugging anytime soon, but at least the US administration is looking at Ukraine in a transactional way. Well, all right, we'll sell you weapons, we'll sell you ammunition, we'll take minerals or we'll take payment, the Europeans will pay us, whatever. That's an improvement. And I think the trend for the administration now is to improve on that as well, because particularly if Putin starts messing around in the Caribbean, I think we'll see a situation where we can put more political pressure jointly on the Russians. But then we need to follow it up with pressure on the economy, because Putin has to have a reason to come to the table. He also needs a way out. And this is the sad part. Right? The Ukrainians are not going to be able to reach an agreement without giving up territory. And 2 years ago, talking to my Ukrainian friends, when I would suggest that, they would look at me like I was crazy and said, no, we're not going to reward Russian aggression. We're not going to reward Putin. We're taking it all back. Right? We're going to go and we're going to recover the borders from 1991. And I can remember thinking to myself, oh, that's not going to happen. Right? Well, now they realize that's not going to happen. In recent polling, they've shown that over 70% of the Ukrainian people are willing to give up land in exchange for peace. Right? They get it, that Putin is somehow going to have to get something out of this. Now, they're not going to give up land, as some have ridiculously suggested in the West, that they're not going to give up land unless it has a Russian boot on it. Right? They're not going to give up territory that Putin wants just so that he can complete the map. But they are going to settle for borders where there are Russian troops present, which is why the Russians keep pushing relentlessly, because they know that. At the same time, the biggest hang-up will be the security guarantees, right? What kind of force can we put in Ukraine so that we don't have a ceasefire and then 5 years from now Putin tries, rearms and tries it all again, right? So that's the other sticking point that they're working on now. But in the meantime, the Russians have gotten smarter, right? On the battlefields, earlier this year they were losing anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 men a day. And remember earlier I said the Russians were recruiting 1,000 a day? So anytime the Ukrainians are killing more than 1,000 a day, it impacts the Russians' ability to recruit. The Russians aren't stupid. They've gotten smarter. They've adapted their tactics. Their losses are down. The Ukrainians also learn. They're learning, but they're hindered by the fact that they have to conserve the lives of their soldiers. And also, remember, they can't send their kids to war. And that's another reason why Ukrainians are ready for peace, because I asked some of the commanders, what would it take to regain territory in the east? And they said, we'd have to draft everybody. And most of the commanders I talked to also agreed that they didn't think it was worth the lives of the young Ukrainians to take back the Donbass. They said it's been destroyed. The people that are left there are largely pro-Russian. Right? It's a tragedy, and it rewards a war of choice, but they would rather do that than send their kids to war, which I tend to agree with. So that's where we're at today. Should I open to questions or comments? Or? Yeah. Anyone have any questions? Or?
You can go ahead,
yeah. But I like to get a little feedback sometimes. But what else have we got? I was talking about the role of Poland, a leadership role for Poland. You know, in my travels through Poland, like I said, I've been impressed with the infrastructure, the high quality here, the work ethic, right, which is still there. I know some of you would tell me it's not quite there, but I've seen it. In Ukraine, the defense industry back in 2022 when the war started was worth about $1 billion. Now in 2025, under war conditions, it's over $30 billion. And that's with, I think, a trickle of Western investment. What I would like to challenge from the West, from my country, from your country, from other countries, is more investment into Ukraine. I've been trying to get oil companies in there. I've been trying to get energy companies. I've been trying to get technology companies there in there. First, they were afraid because they didn't want to upset the Trump administration by supporting Ukraine. Then they were afraid, well, if we send our people in there, it's a war. We don't, you know, will we lose our investment? And my argument to that has been, hey, look, it's risk. Right? Business is always about risk, and risk means there's gain there. An investment in Ukraine now with a military-industrial complex that's grown to over $30 billion, there's something there. And I think a country like Poland, being a frontline country, there's a lot more that can be done from this side, not just for Polish investment, but to help with American investment. For instance, offshore companies can do a lot more, I think, development and production here in Poland for stuff across the border. Although Putin's given us a little warning with that attack on the train tracks. He's watching. Right? In terms of the economy, the Russian economy was predicted to grow almost by 4% this year. In reality, it grew about 0.6%. So a huge change. What happened? Right? Well, what happened was the Ukrainians focused on a new strategy of long-range strikes. And they have been pummeling the Russian gas and oil industry, which is where Russia makes its money. I mean, we all have heard Russia's been called, basically it's just a giant gas station, right? I always ask some audiences in America when I'm talking, I'm like, hey, can anyone here name products that they buy from Russia, right? You get like vodka, you know, and weaponry. But people don't even buy Russian weapons anymore, right? The Russian arms industry used to earn billions and billions of dollars every year selling stuff all around the world, but the poor performance of their equipment on the battlefield, all right, has seen a huge drop in their arms sales. You know, there's opportunities there for, I think, Poland and the West to partner with Ukrainian companies who are doing the innovation on a daily basis, right? Because their technology changes. They always throw out there every 6 weeks you need new technology for drones and robots, right? And every time I go there, I'm amazed at the level of autonomy and high tech there. From a country that before the war, you know, had drones only for entertainment purposes. Now, you know, drones on both sides have taken over the battlefield, and that includes robots on the ground, robots in the air, remote sensors, remote mines. There's one unit I spoke with, the Nemesis Brigade. These guys were, first they were the Nemesis Company, then they were the Nemesis Battalion, now they're the Nemesis Brigade with thousands of drone operators. These guys have destroyed in 2 years of combat over $1 billion worth of Russian equipment. And they've done it at cheap cost to themselves. All right. But they're lagging behind. I heard that they're looking to produce about 4 million drones in the coming year, which is frightening. I watched these videos on YouTube of poor Russian soldiers. For the first time in my life, I was feeling sorry for Russian soldiers. Watching videos where one guy's being chased by like 3 drones. Right? It's almost comical. It almost reminds me of those cartoons with the coyote and the roadrunner I watched as a kid. Right? But it's real life. Right? It's real drama. These guys are running for their lives, and generally they're not making it. Excuse me. But at the same time, the Russians are learning as well, right? They're not stupid. They've invented, they've actually taken the lead in a few areas of warfare, such as glide bombs. I think the only time I was scared in Ukraine was, and I was way back from the front. I'm not stupid enough to go up to the front lines, but I was way back from the front visiting a headquarters, and we got a report of glide bombs, right? And these are cheap, mass-produced bombs using Chinese and Japanese milling equipment in Russia, right? So much for sanctions on Japanese equipment. 2,000 to 5,000 pound bombs. When these things hit, they destroy everything, right? And Ukrainians are up against that every day. And they're trying to find now the technology to counter the low tech. So we have this battle where these guys are telling me the entire front for about 40 kilometers, 20 kilometers on each side, sometime within the next 6 months will become 100% lethal for human beings to move around. Right? It's already pretty close to that. Earlier in the war, Ukrainians were very proud of the fact that if you were a Ukrainian soldier and you got wounded, right, they could get you out from the front lines. We have this thing, it's called the golden hour, right, where if you're wounded, you have an hour. If you can get that soldier to a medical facility in an hour, they'll survive. Right? We saw that in Afghanistan and Iraq, places where I served, where soldiers who before would have died, and we're talking about people with like double amputations, triple amputations, they were surviving. Right? Now with the Ukrainians, because of the drones, the number of Russian drones, including the wire-guided drones, which can go 20, 30, 40 kilometers using an optical wire to guide them and can come around behind and strike vehicles. You can't move wounded soldiers until maybe at night, and even then it's a risky deal, right? Because drone activity is less at night because of it's expensive to have nighttime optics on drones. But they're trying to use robots to remove their casualties from the front, which is a great innovation, but again, in daylight, the robots are being attacked by other robots. And so the idea that the entire front will be like some sort of vision out of Terminator 3 is coming true pretty quickly. Let's see. How are we doing on time?
Potential conflict between Russia and Baltic countries.
So, yeah, we're not there yet. But again, if Putin keeps attacking NATO countries behind the lines, right, blowing up a railroad, setting a supermarket on fire, putting explosives on DHL aircraft, and we do nothing about it, I think he'll change his mind. And we could see a situation where, particularly in Estonia, which has a city called Narva in the northeast, which is mostly populated by Russians, who, by the way, have been pretty happy to live in the Estonian economy. Right? The Estonians, when they first went independent, went a little crazy and tried to get rid of Russians and outlaw the language, and they discriminate against them. And I thought that was a bad idea. And they've calmed down, and they've shown the Russian ethnic population there that, no, you're part of our country. You should benefit from, being part of the EU. And it's calmed down, but the Russians are very adept at stirring things up. And there could be a situation like Crimea, where all of a sudden men in uniform pop up, no insignia, right? It doesn't say Russia on it anywhere. And they claim they're locals and they're there to defend the beleaguered Russian population from the evil Estonian Nazis, right? We've heard that before. That's a potential scenario. If we don't push back on Putin in these other places, he's going to push forward on places like that. Yes, sir.
Should a peace deal be reached in Ukraine, do you reckon, how would this peace be enforced? A demilitarized zone, demarcation line, or spheres of influence like the German model? And who would be the actors who take part in this process?
That is the $64 million question. I think most likely we're looking at like a Korea model, right, where you have a ceasefire, an armistice, but no peace, right? No real agreement. In terms of who could be there, this is another reason why we've got to beat Putin up a little bit more. He's got to be forced to accept some sort of group there. And you could have some sort of non-aligned group there, Malaysian troops, Singaporean troops, right? Troops that are non-NATO. That's less desirable. A more desirable force would be NATO troops in there, and then making it so that, all right, Ukraine's not a member of NATO, but attacking NATO troops, you know, there's a danger of Article 5 there. That would be hard for Putin to swallow, but again, you know, if we can beat him up enough economically and beat him up enough on the battlefield, there's a chance that we could do that. Great question, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks. How do you imagine the world after the war? Yeah, because the war gonna end at some point, and for sure Russian get their lesson for it. It wasn't 3-day war. Ukraine, they learned their lesson. Europeans, we are learning our lesson. But for sure Russia won't stop at Ukraine. Even at some point, even they stop for a certain amount of time, they will try to get more impact on overall world. So how do you imagine where they're gonna focus after Ukraine, after the ceasefire?
Sure. So that's kind of continuation of the last theme. Again, you know, Vladimir Putin has to be given a reason to have a ceasefire, a reason to agree to some sort of security guarantees for Ukraine, and frankly, a reason to not rearm and do it again in 5 years. And the best reasons there are economic reasons. Right? I mean, one thing here, Putin, he's lost the European gas and oil markets forever. And in the meantime, he's gained markets in China and India to some extent. But China is never going to be the lucrative partner that Europe was. We have to make Putin understand that if he continues to destroy his relationship with us, he's weakening himself in his relationship with China, right? Looming behind everything I've said tonight, China, looming in the background. And this is actually one of the reasons why President Trump is so annoyed at the Ukraine conflict, because China is what he's really worried about. Right? And we have to make it so that Putin feels the same fear of China that other countries do. And look, this relationship between Xi and Putin, it's kabuki theater, right? It's fake. We're talking about, you know, hundreds of years of animosity there. And you have this situation now where in the Far East, frankly, if I were a young Russian and I lived in Vladivostok, I'd be taking Chinese at night school, right? Because in a few years, I'm probably going to need it there. And so the West has an opportunity here. I think we need to put more pressure on China. Right? I think the European countries have to realize that you can't force a settlement in Ukraine and have great economic relations with China. You can't have the both. Right? They're going to have to choose. And putting pressure on China to put pressure on Russia to come to the table is one possible way to do it. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot more coordination than exists right now between the United States and Europe in the train realm. But I personally think that that's a potential there. Because Xi has done a couple of things, actually, that have been helpful. First of all, early in the war, he warned Vladimir Putin against use of nuclear weapons, which is another reason why I don't think he'd go nuclear. Because the Chinese essentially told him, if you go nuclear, you lose our support. Right? So there are some limits to what Xi will accept in this war. And our task, I think, in the West is to tighten those limits down and give Putin less room to maneuver with China. Thanks.
Ralph, if I may.
Sure.
Attrition. That's the word, that's the quote which I've been reading in New York Times a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of voice within the war environmental saying that that's the way, that's the scenario which is going to happen by 99% of assuredness within the next 2.5 up to 3 years. So what I'm trying to say, or more likely raise a question, do you believe that's the way how the conflicts gonna keep running. I've been reading, as I said, in New York Times, they counting up to between 2.5 and 3 years of the war to be continued.
Yeah. So after 35 years in the CIA, I don't believe there's 99% assurance of anything. And anytime you do go out with 99% assurance, you're usually disappointed or proven wrong. So yeah, that's a scenario, but not guaranteed. There's a, I think that scenario plays out if we don't do anything. If the current status quo continues, yes, that scenario has a lot of life to it. But we've got Europe stepping up, right? Germany, for the first time, approving deficit spending for defense. Never happened since World War II. The Baltic countries meeting their targets for NATO spending, right? The NATO summit was a Trump victory. And it was a victory for NATO, too, because they got Trump to come back. Right? So things can change. And that dire prediction, the thing I like about that prediction is it puts pressure on us to say, no, that's not the way we want this thing to end.
But there's a lot of voice, even from NGOs, that saying that protracted thing is going to happen. It's not going to end up within the next 2, 3,
Sure.
7 months.
Yeah. And I would say, again, 35 years in the CIA, I would look at those NGOs and say, who's behind these NGOs? Right? One thing that's been clear is the Russians have won the information warfare from the start. Right? And I think there's an element of that in these dire predictions. But again, these predictions are useful in that they should spur the West into taking more action.
I would like to say the last word in plain English. War usually equal money. So there is a lot of interest to keep up running the war, isn't it?
By everyone who's not fighting it, yes. Yeah.
So here.
Oh.
So I have a question. We had this part of this conversation on the lunch, but I didn't ask that one. So like, let's imagine if the war is gonna continue for 3 years, 1 year, 2 years, it doesn't matter. But the first mover advantage is to start a business before everyone else. And Ukraine, while rebuilding, it's going to be the perfect place to do a business in. So relations and everything. So right now, there's a lot of players, or let's imagine I have a business, I would like to start locally to provide services or to build something or to invest. How to start? Like what are the points to get in and to start doing a business in there in the reality of the war today, tomorrow, or in a year even, but to have this first mover advantage over the other ones?
Yeah. So again, high risk, high gain. The war will eventually end. There'll be billions of dollars from the EU and the West that'll pour in there in one shape or another. Companies that are there now will be at the head of the line as opposed to companies who show up after. So there's one reason to face the risk. The other is everyone worries about corruption, which is a legitimate concern. Huge corruption there. But there are limits even to the corruption in Ukraine. Right? I mean, this recent scandal that came out, I mean, everyone's known these guys have been dirty for years, right? But finally it was triggered. Investigation, Vladimir Zelensky tried to take control over the 2 main state investigative agencies, and the people took to the streets, right? Which shows that's something that hasn't happened in Russia, right? But it happened in Ukraine. So there are honest people there. There are people who want to do business honestly. And as far as working through the bureaucracy the Ukrainian government has in the last couple of years, they have been working hard to reduce the bureaucracy, to make it easier for foreign investment, to make it easier to export. Right? So there's a lot of opportunity there, and I would suggest to businesses that the first thing is to have your own contacts there, to have people there on the ground, right? To get ahead of the line before the war ends, so that when the war ends, you're in the front of the line. Right? Thank you. Yes, sir.
One more question. Are sabotages in Poland, like the recent ones, more likely to occur as the war is ongoing? And are these attacks considered serious enough in the White House to either increase the number of U.S. troops on Polish soil or perhaps initiate some joint intelligence initiatives?
they will continue. If the war continues, they will continue and they'll increase. Here's the irony. If the war ends or there's a ceasefire, they'll still continue and they'll still increase. Because Putin's found something that works, right? He's not going to turn it off until someone gives him a reason to turn it off. As far as U.S. and Washington, look, again, they look at it as like this is Europe's problem. Intelligence, yes, there will be cooperation. There is. Right? The press likes to think that somehow intelligence cooperation has gone out of fashion in Washington because of the Trump administration. That's not true. Right? I assure you, when I travel, I like to meet with a lot of my former colleagues, and they all assure me that stuff is going on, and I believe them. Right? Intelligence cooperation is easy. Right? There's very little cost to it. So that will continue. But I don't see the U.S. dispatching any troops here. They already had troops in Poland. Right? And I remember I was talking to some members of Congress who were very concerned about the Ukraine war, saying, well, you know, first it'll start with us sending troops to Poland, and then next thing you know, we'll be sending them to Ukraine. I'm like, well, we have troops in Poland. Right? They've been there for a long time. You know, so there's a lot of disinformation within our own government, but I can assure you there's no appetite to send more forces here. Yeah, I see your hand's been up for a while back there.
So first and foremost, sir, thank you for coming and presenting this thought-provoking speech, especially for my age group, 18 to 24, because we are the generation that is going to be in charge in a couple of years.
You can thank us later.
So I just wanted to pose a quick question, because you've said about indicators and the way we as Poland are going to navigate the political situation here in Europe in a couple of years in the future. So what are the exact suggestions for us, for Poland, to be more fundamental, more seen as a leader, not as a follower, especially after the war?
Yeah. No, I mean, I do apologize for what my generation's handing over to your generation. I think part of the reasons why I give this speech is it's like therapy, and then I go to Ukraine because it's a little bit of guilt there. But to be serious, though, yes, I mean, your generation has to step up. And I see it. I've spoken to universities. I'm not one of these people who says the next generation is worthless. It's not, right? I'm still not entirely satisfied with millennials because I had some tough employees when I was in the agency. But the next generation, Gen Z, your generation, right? I've met so many people who are motivated to get involved, motivated to do bigger things. You're here, right? That's a great example. I've talked to young people who in the United States, there's no draft. I've talked to young people who are joining the military. Right, because they want to do more. Right? The disillusionment with the current existing political system is pretty high in your generation. And the only thing that's going to change it is yourselves. And that's why I look at Poland, and last night speaking to the Institute of Leadership, where I see a great leadership role for this country. I really do. I see that in the enthusiasm with the people I've spoken with here. I see that in just when I'm in restaurants or stopping in gas stations or traveling to the country, and just how people are doing their jobs, and you know, the level of service, the pride in service, right? And then I see it when I'm across in Ukraine, when I see all the stuff coming across the border, I see all this Polish aid going in there. I feel it even stronger when I go to the Baltics, right? And I travel through the Baltics, and they all tell me how much, you know, they're looking to Poland for leadership, because the Baltics are tiny, right? Very small. And I heard it last night in the ideas of a coalition between Poland, the Baltic states, and the Nordic states. I was like, yeah, that's a great idea, right? But that's going to be on your generation to make it real. So thank you. I thank you. Yes, sir.
So thank you very much for your talk and insights into this conflict.
I hope they were helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I have one question. It's more in terms of changing the power in Russia. I mean, you mentioned that there is the sanctions. There are even more sanctions now imposed by the United States.
Yeah.
Also, we heard from Russian propaganda, Russian news, this war was supposed to end in 3 days, 1 week, 1 month. But Ukrainians still fight.
Yeah.
So they still fight, and we don't see that this conflict might end relatively soon. Due to the sanctions, also the lifestyle of Russians decreased. So is there any chance that the power will change in Russia, so that there will some kind of substantial changes, so not only like on the paper, but the actual changes?
Yeah. So again, I don't believe in any 90% certainty or anything. I think there is, and the West needs to, I think what stops it sometimes, the West fears it. We should embrace it. Right? The West fears change, particularly during the last administration. They fear a change in Russian leadership for two reasons. One, they always say, well, Putin will be gone, but the next guy will be even worse, right? Or, Putin will be gone, the Russian Federation will collapse, and we'll have, the Islamic Republic of Bashkortostan declaring itself a nuclear state, right? Because all these small semi-autonomous areas and all that will keep their weapons, unlike Ukraine, who unwisely trusted us and gave them up, right? So those are the two nightmare scenarios, and it drives me crazy because we did the same thing in Syria, we did the same thing in Iraq. We've looked at Iran, we've been afraid of change there, right? But with Russia, just when I start to lose hope, something happens that makes me think that they could change. And that's whether it's a guy like Navalny, who, make no mistake, he was a Russian nationalist, but here's a guy who gave his life to stand up to the regime, right? You have other people who, a little old lady who will show up on the sidewalk and start, speaking out against the war. I mean, this is a country where you go to prison for 7 years for calling it a war and not a special military operation, right? So there's seeds of doubt there, and then little things like great jokes like this one. What's the difference between Putin and Hitler? Hitler knew when to shoot himself, right? That's a joke in Moscow, And when little jokes like that pop up, there's something behind that. And it makes me think there are people there who there's not this monolith of thought there, right? It's fear. You look at the Prigozhin uprising, right? Which I went to bed Friday night so hopeful, and woke up that Saturday so disappointed. It shows that there are cracks in the facade there. And just recently there's been criticism of some of Putin's policies and some of his economic policies. He's under pressure. So I don't buy it that the next person will automatically be worse. Right? And I don't buy it that the Russian Federation will collapse like the Soviet Union. Right? And I think the West has to say, okay, if there's going to be change there, we need to plan for it and we need to embrace it. And we really need to be prepared for it so that we can help shape it. That's a great question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to ask you about recent events in Ukraine. Ukrainian government is trying to dismantle or weaken NABU. This is the government organization which fights with corruption.
Yeah.
How it can affect relationship with Western partners and in relationship with US and EU financial sector?
Yeah.
And my second question is about how do you rate NABU and their work, because they are taking more digital evidence of corruption than taking standard procedures.
Yeah. So, I think the problem, NABU is not being dismantled. It's under attack, but it's survived. They got the last laugh now in this investigation, right? And I'm trying to remember where Ukraine was ranked. There's like the ranking of 180 countries for corruption. Ukraine ranked at 105, right? Russia ranked at 154, so they're 50 better than Russia. That doesn't mean that we should tolerate it, right? And we shouldn't. And the Ukrainian people, this gives me hope as well. When President Zelensky tried to take control over NABU and SAPO, the other investigative arm of the services there, the people took to the streets and forced them to change, right? So, and not only that, in polling last year, the Ukrainian people were asked, what are the things that make your life difficult, right? And for years, of course, number one was the war, right? Last year, number one was corruption. War was number two, right? So the Ukrainian people, they have their limits. And I'm putting my faith in the people of Ukraine. I mean, they've been brave enough to stand up to the Russians and brave enough to maintain a democracy under very difficult conditions. I think, they're the ones that provide the moral guidance to the government, and when the government tries to get around it, they bring them back in line. So I have hope that can be improved. As far as relations with foreign partners like the U.S. with the FBI and all that, they're a little distracted with internal things now in the States, but they're still there. Right? There's still cooperation. And again, this is where Poland and other countries in Europe can take a leadership role and embrace them, right? Squeeze the corruption out of them, so to speak. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like to pick up on the previous question. Who or what would be the next evil who will fill out the power vacuum after Putin? Somebody from the inner circle, a jackass like Medvedev, some of the Siloviks, or perhaps a new actor who has been groomed backstage? Because I don't believe, I'm a pessimist here, I don't believe in such a thing as a Russian opposition not happening in the next century. I'm sorry, but I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
Let's be realists here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the most likely scenario for Putin is that the oligarch, I mean, the Russian government is kind of like a crime family, right? And in the United States where we have the mafia, in the old days, you know, you had the boss and then you had all the capos. And when the capos decided that the boss was not good for business anymore, they whacked him, right? They took him out. Boom, new boss, good, better for business. I think the same thing is that's the same fate waiting for Putin, which is why he has a 40,000 man protection force, right? The Rosgvardia, the Russian National Guard is like 40,000 men. Their main job is to protect Vladimir Putin, right? It's a really bizarre dichotomy of Putin has popularity ranking that would make any Western politician jealous, but at the same time he needs 40,000 men to keep him in power. At some point he may disillusion enough of the Siloviki and the oligarchs. I think we played the oligarchs wrong, right? Like in the beginning we sanctioned them and shut down all their holdings. We kind of forced them to go back to Russia. And then Putin was sitting there and said, I told you can't trust those guys, they'll take your money. Right? We should have embraced the oligarchs and we should have treated them and said, hey look, you know, if you really want to do business, then you guys be the capos and get rid of the chief there, but it didn't happen. As far as who amongst the Siloviki would rise, it won't be Medvedev. He's a drunkard. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if on the same day there's a solemn ceremony for Putin. There's probably a quieter one for Medvedev somewhere as they throw him somewhere. But you know, never underestimate. You look what happened in 1918 in World War I when the Russian army, the Tsarist Russian army, collapsed. Right. I think there's a danger of the Russian army. There's two dangers with the casualties the Russians suffer. And one actually keeps me up at night, and that is that Putin could turn around. Exactly, that was a great question, thank you. Yeah.
Can we define it? Because, you know, in geopolitics, geography is the key, right? And we are very close to the combat zone. So, for example, Spanish people, and they are not so close, and they don't want to pay enough for our NATO spendings, and I understand them a little bit. You know, they have another issues, and this is very, very, you know, far away from Russia. But what can we do if we don't have even in Poland any nuke plants? We have very expensive, you know, electricity costs. We are constantly blocked by Germans, and obviously. Right now, what do we see? That in you know, empty factories of Volkswagen, they're gonna produce ammos. You know, we don't feel safe about it. You know, and they don't wanna put any duties on electric Chinese cars. Yeah. So, you know, also the same with Germans was with Nord Stream deal. You know, the same with the first days of Ukraine war. Sending helmets there. Mm-hmm. So we talk a lot about our leadership, but what do we mean in NATO? But a lot of our allies, they think that Polish are, you know, warlike, that we like to fight and a little bit.
Not bad for an army.
You mean to do an ally with Nordic and Baltic states, or maybe, you know, we should produce more ammo as Poland, but yeah. What do you mean about the leadership? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'm not an expert on Polish politics. I try to keep abreast of it, but when I say a leadership model, you know, I think Poland has some advantages. For instance, I told you earlier, there are the Baltic countries, the Nordic countries. When I travel there, they talk about Poland as a natural ally, right? And because you're a bigger country, You know, the Nordic countries are very wealthy, the Baltic countries are poor, but they have a great relationship there. We now have Finland, probably the best new member of NATO you could ask for, right? I mean, they did a poll, they did a survey of the Finnish population and said, hey, if you were attacked, would you defend your country, right? One of the lowest countries, I think, was Germany. The highest country was Finland, where like 80% of the people said, kyllä, you know, we'll fight. It's finding common ground with these other countries, right? You form political blocs, and then you work together to convince laggards like Spain, right, to get with the program, right? There's ways. I think part of it just is like national confidence. Right? It's just like with the Ukrainians; they have this amazing technology, and I always ask them, why aren't you exporting this stuff? Why aren't you trying to build your markets outside the country? And they all come up with this, oh, well, if we do, then, you know, Andro will buy our IP and we'll go bankrupt, or they'll beat us in the markets. I'm like, no, you have the best stuff, sell it. Be confident, go and take the markets, right? It's like you were saying earlier about new lawyers who sit in their office and wait for clients to come in. No, you have to go get them, you know? And I think if Poland wants to have a leadership role, you got to go take it. And,
yeah, that's about leadership, right? To having the vision of action, but also European Union trying to find their spot in European defense. What would be the best scenario of cooperation of European Union and NATO? And
yeah, I mean that's a complicated thing there because you know Brussels is Brussels. I think NATO. I don't see the European having really a constructive role in defense. Let NATO do that. Let the European Union help fund it, you know, but keep them in their place. And it has to go with NATO. And again, let Poland can take a leading role in NATO by, I think, taking charge of things like providing more training opportunities. I don't know why there aren't large bases here in Poland training NATO troops on the new modern warfare, right? The doctrine of modern warfare in Ukraine has changed completely. And what NATO is prepared, equipped, and trained to fight, that style of warfare is gone, right? But the Ukrainians are fighting a new style. And I think the place, first of all, the NATO presence needs to be expanded in Ukraine. Putin blames us for being there anyways. We might as well go. Not fighting troops, but advisors and collectors, right? And then we should be having schools here in Poland, in the frontline states, taking this new technology, taking these new tactics, and teaching them to NATO.
What about shooting the missiles over, you know, pointing the NATO region?
Yes, NATO should defend its airspace, right? Like President Trump, he always says, he criticized the Democrats saying, well, you're not a real country if you don't defend your borders, right? Well, the same thing applies to your air, right? And like, for instance, when you had the drone incursion over Poland a couple of months back, right? Well, 3 drones is a navigation area, 19 is a probe, right? Unfortunately, because NATO isn't ready for this new style of warfare, I mean, they scrambled F-35 jets and all this stuff. I mean, we probably spent more money trying to track down the drones than the Russians, way more than the Russians spent sending the drones, right? So we have to improve our counter-drone technology, right, and develop a new strategy there. But also, I thought NATO missed a huge chance to put an air cap over half of Ukraine and say, anything headed towards our airspace, we're shooting it down. Right? And people say, well, tactically, that doesn't make sense, blah, blah. No, it's about politics, not about tactics. And this is a signal that Putin saw, right? They have no interest in defending the airspace, right? So that needs to change. Thank you for that.
Thank you. What do you think is the greatest strength of Poland for NATO? How can we be useful for NATO?
Geography.
Geography is one, and just your size, right? You've built the largest ground force, I think, in NATO right now.
Technology
Yeah. You need to be able, again, you need to be studying in depth the new technologies in Ukraine and applying them to the modern day force. Tanks, we're always reading, at least once a week, there's an article that the era of the tank is done, right? Oh, artillery's no good anymore. Baloney, right? It's changed. Now, sure, you send 50 tanks out by themselves, they're going to get destroyed, right? That's millions of dollars worth of equipment and about to be destroyed by a few $1,000s worth of drones. But you send tanks out with defensive drones, with the right technologies, counter-drone technologies, and those tanks will be victorious. Or artillery, right? In the beginning of the war, if a single gun could fire 100 shots in a day, right, because it was safe and had to move because of counter battery fire and all that. But now because of drones, that gun can maybe fire 25 rounds, right, which means those 25 rounds have to be accurate. So you need the new technologies to make the artillery rounds accurate because you're firing less, but you got to be more accurate. So these are all lessons from the battlefield that have to be incorporated into NATO. And I hear a lot of talk about it, but I haven't seen a lot of action on it. Thanks.
So may I ask you, because I'd like to inquire about your perspective, as I presume it would be specifically beneficial for us as you are the participant of this intelligence agencies game that happened and keeps taking place worldwide. Because now, in times of information era, in times of hybrid war, there are multiple operations that are influencing nations by special operations that are conducted by bots, by some agents that are hired to spread some misinformation. And my question is, like, for you, with your experience, how would you describe the deviation between what we know publicly and what actual state of facts is? Like, what's the difference between propaganda that we actually know and between the actual facts that we should know? And on the other hand, what would be the best strategy for us as a nation to be more resilient, to protect ourselves from being influenced by those operations conducted by Russian government and agents themselves?
Yeah. Okay, that's a complicated question. We could have a whole seminar on that. So information warfare, or cognitive warfare, as it's now being referred to, right? Totalitarian states always have an advantage because they're never constrained by the truth, right? Western states, and this includes, the U.S. with the CIA, we operate in information warfare space with a lot of constraints, including the truth, right? In terms of what's different between classified information and the truth, it's a lot closer than you might think in reality, right? As opposed to totalitarian states where it's quite the opposite. Intelligence failures are usually not based on a lack of information. They're based on poor analysis, right? Or failure to recognize a threat from the information you have. And the two best examples are, yes, the Russians are coming, but no, we overestimated their capabilities and lost an opportunity to defeat them early in the war. The other one being Gaza, where the Israelis had all the information they needed to prevent the October 7th attack. They just didn't act on it. All right, so information, it's only power. Intelligence information is only power if you actually use it. Right? And it comes down to the analysis, and this is where we were talking earlier about AI and all, right? AI it's a tool, it's not the answer to everything. But in terms of the future of intelligence, like human intelligence, the Gaza and the war in Ukraine, they have, the intelligence failures have one thing in common: bad human intelligence, right? Why did the West think the Russian army was so advanced and so capable? Because we based our intelligence largely on signals intelligence, technical intelligence, cyber intelligence, right? The Ukrainians were giving us thousands of documents about the Russian military, right? And our analysts were taking it and they were analyzing it. What they didn't realize was it was all lies. And the sad thing is it wasn't an organized Russian disinformation campaign to delude the West, right? It was lies from the commanders lying to Moscow because they didn't want the Ministry of Defense to understand how bad their units were, because they were stealing all the money, they were selling all the supplies, they weren't doing the training, right? And we needed a few human sources who could have said, I haven't written an honest report in my entire military career, right? Our analysts didn't have that, and I blame us, the human people, for not having that. Same in Gaza, right? The Israelis had all this information, including the entire war plan for the Hamas attack, right? But they chose not to believe it. They said, no, Hamas is working on governance. They're not going to attack us. They sat out the last 3 wars with Palestinian and Islamic Jihad. We're good. No, they weren't, right? So human intelligence, we always call it the intelligence of last resort because it's the most dangerous to collect, but it's the most valuable when you can have a human being who can tell you that document is fake. Right? Same with deep fakes and AI. AI maybe can tell us if it's a deep fake or not, but a human being can tell you if it is or not. So in the future, human intelligence will be harder, more expensive, and more necessary. And I'm not just doing that for a job plug because I'm retired, but it'll be an important factor to sort all that out. Hope that answered it. Please. Yeah.
This will be the last question.
Okay, last question.
Okay,
Thank you, because I'm starting to feel kind of...
I got lucky, I guess. Thank you. Appreciate you being here and your speech earlier. I have a question about China. You mentioned China. We see that China is really arming up pretty fast, and we see some movements against Taiwan. Yeah. Do you think that if there are some movements there in the Pacific, the US will get involved, and how will that influence the US presence here on the eastern flank of NATO?
Yeah, China. Like I said, China's in the background, and they're watching our commitment to Ukraine. And if we fail to commit to Ukraine, why would we commit to Taiwan? Right? So they're looking at that. The Chinese military, they just had a huge scandal there. Right? Xi has had a huge political battle with his commanders. They did like an inspection of some of their missile units and found out that the missiles didn't have fuel in them, they had water, right? Because they were pretending they were mission capable, and they weren't. So Xi is painfully aware that his military has many of the same problems as the Russian military. So there's a big question mark. Until Xi is comfortable with his military and its capabilities, I don't see him launching anything, right? Because as you know, I think it was Donald Rumsfeld who said, you don't go to war with the army you wish you had, you go with the army you have, right? And if that army is lacking, you're in trouble. So it's not a certainty that there'll be a war there. And there's a lot of other things going on in the Pacific area. You have this new resurgent Japan, right? Japan, I mean, they're talking about a nuclear capability, which is driving the Chinese crazy. You've got Vietnam, one of the few countries who knows how to fight the Chinese, right? They beat them in a small war back in the 1980s, taught the Chinese a lesson. Korea, South Korea is increasingly important economically and militarily. Right? So there's a lot going on there. It's not a given. Some people say 2027, that's when she's going to take Taiwan. Lastly, the idea, will America defend Taiwan or not? I don't know. There's a lot of Americans who say, why are we involved in a Chinese civil war from the 1940s?
Chips Gas from Kyndryl US, my colleague who works in Kyndryl. We switch places because of the time slots he have. So welcome Christopher Dimas from Kyndryl US. Can you put Christopher on the screen? Technical issues. Wiesz co, on jest połączony. Sorry for a second. I can guarantee you that deepfakes will, crypto financial transfers that are related to different type of crimes. So that's about myself, about Chris, which is not appearing on the screen yet. So basically, my speech will be more about the services I provide for our US customers, and deepfakes that Chris is going to talk about is related to the aspects that are global. So deepfakes is more global problem. Natalia, do you have any things? Okay. So, there's a dynamic. Hello? Oh, okay. Okay. It's working. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Okay. So, my topic is a little bit more focused on financial sector directly. I'm focusing about cryptocurrency transfer patterns in context of criminal and terrorist financing implication for the Polish banking sector. It's very, I would say, it's very popular topic those days. As you read newspapers, you heard about Binance, you heard about other crypto exchanges. There's a lot of criminal activity because those are new players on the block. But we're gonna talk about something a little bit else, something a little bit more complex. So we're gonna cover the topic of joining cryptocurrency transfers with traditional transfers, because you know when you learn your lesson about criminal activity all over the world, you need to remember two things. Those guys can read, and they read everything that's impacting them, like all of EU regulation recommendation. They are reading this stuff, and they are clever because they are making a lot of money on their illegal activity, and they can earn a lot of people who can do complex schemes. They're not, those are not the days they're like covering the funds by the restaurants or by the hotels. They use new type of assets. They use traditional financial systems. Here we're gonna focus on side pocket funds. I don't know if you are aware of this topic. Side pockets is kind of legal engine that allow you to transfer the funds from the funds main pockets to separate these problematic funds out of the main source. It's obviously working around the world, mostly in UK, but also in a couple of offshores. And we're going to talk about crypto, but with more complex scheme as covering the funds for terrorist financing, other illegal operation. When you are talking about money laundering, which is my basic topic, you use two specific terms, the very most, I believe, important terms. The suspicious transaction and atypical, unusual transaction. First, you type with the normal email investigation, you type what behavior is unusual for a company. Then you decide which is suspicious, and then you report it. It's very simple. But when you go and think about it, financing of terrorism or supporting intelligence activity, it's not money laundering. It have different purpose. So the operation is a little bit different. When you do not need to launder the money, but you need to finance some types of activities, you don't think like money launderer. And you don't think in the terms of unusual activity. You want to be as usual as possible to not get covered. So, to not get caught. So, imagine that you have a hacker group from North Korea, from Russia, from Iran, and they do an attack on the infrastructure. They get ransomware in some companies, and they get money in cryptocurrencies. Or they put just simple way, a simple scam, they fraud the money. Actually, Polish Financial Investigation Unit in previous years report mentioned that the frauds are the most common crimes related to money laundering. So most of the activity related to money laundering comes from frauds. So imagine this type of activity, and you get cryptocurrencies. Usually you would say, okay, the money launderer gonna go put this money in crypto exchange, transfer it to bank, and they try to launder the money. With this type of activities, when we see what's happening all around the world, those people are not going usually to crypto exchanges. They are buying assets like real estates. They are buying companies. They are investing highly in the assets that they can leave the track of the normal financial systems. Because when you move money, you leave the trace. When you move outside of the financial system, you buy assets. You can bring it as a part of the company they are creating. So you're separating the asset you own from the frauded or other crime-related activity you started with the first place. After you do that, you put those assets into the companies. Like you have a company that you want to, for example, you are a Putin friend and you need to get technology from US or Europe, and you need to pay for that technology. You need to move money to get patents from those companies, or otherwise you get killed as not a good friend. and imagine that you have those assets. You're putting those assets in the companies. So you separated that from crypto. Right now, you put those assets in a company and you invest in a trust fund, or you start investing and you putting this money into European companies, not directly but indirectly by the funds. With the offshore, you're going right away to less risky jurisdiction, like not European Union directly, but you're going to the countries we are accepting that are Liechtenstein, that are like for example, I don't know, maybe UK. They don't have the same standard as we. They are like more business oriented, and we don't consider those guys as high risk jurisdiction. That it's much better to put the money from there than from Russia directly. And when you place those funds, because you have those assets, you can sell them. And when you place those funds, you sold the assets, you're getting investing in those master funds like EU, US regulated. You have this money in your side pockets, and the funds are getting money from your activity. You getting the knowledge. You can get the technological advantage by moving this money, and you can go both ways. You can go from sanctioned countries, moving this money to gain patents, to invest indirectly by those trust funds that are placed in places like, for example, some offshore jurisdiction, then going to countries like UK, as I mentioned, Liechtenstein, and then going to master funds in US, EU regulated, and getting the possession of those companies at some part, so getting the access to the documentation as an investor. This is a part when you buy the patents and you buy the technology, and then you can go the opposite way. You just can transfer money outside of, for example, Russian Federation or any other country we want to leave the money on, and make it secure outside of sanction by that. You can bring that money back by turning all of those 6 steps, so you can go back to assets or you can go back to crypto. It's very convenient to work on those mechanisms, because you're getting covered by all of those financial transactions and transaction outside of the financial system. So basically, it's very, very convenient for those bad actors, I would say, to infiltrate our system. And this type of activity, as I said before, it's a little bit different from traditional money laundering, when you focus on the aspects like, I need to launder the money there from drug trafficking, I need to make them clean, and I need to put them in the financial system. You are actually have different objectives. So you need to gain technology, you need to fund your companies, you need to cover operatives, you need to pay for those explosions that happen, you need to pay for all of those. And crypto is a tech. I would say blockchain, of course, is a technology, but crypto is a convenient asset to own and to transfer the money, because combining all of those data with the right now onward. So this is not AI. This is not an AI. This can be combined with AI. But looking from disruption in the financial patterns, you're switching to observing what are logical action based on the data you receive from the whole population. Deep relationship modeling. So this is coordination and focusing on hidden network, like we did some stuff in Kyndryl couple months ago when we work on anti-fraud solution, and you can imagine that there are some people targeted by anti-fraud systems, and they're like they are cleared from suspicious of doing fraudulent activities. But when you go farther and you do the heat maps and you see all of those people are combining on specific activity, we done that on focusing on the merchants. So we see that people that were previously considered as high risk because of their activity related to high probability fraud, they're like focusing on different area. This is a deep relational modeling, and we are searching for the characteristic of those entities or of those individuals that are in common. And at some point, when you not treat a customer as individual, but you treat a customer as a population, you can go to a little bit different outcome than usual. Multi-source capital fusion. Usually, when you're observing financial networks, you are focusing on what you are doing. Like you're observing fiduciary finance because you're a bank, and you're living at the crypto. You're living at the stock exchange. You don't consider anything what's happening around. But those actions are related. When you consider, for example, what's happening right now on stock exchange, this will have impact on behavior of the customers. And when you see cryptocurrency transactions, you can see the patterns. Yeah, like your client is trying to put in your system like $10 million, and suddenly you observe the public available blockchain network, several of those, and you see those type of transactions with very similar amounts happen on blockchain with very similar time slots. You can consider, okay, when I don't know the origin of the funds, it's unclear for me because customers, for example, telling me that he sold his art collection and I don't have any real evidence I can check, and I see very problematic Bitcoin transaction and Bitcoin transfer with the very similar amount in the very similar days, I know what question to ask. And this is a type of new approach. Counterfactual reasoning engine. This is more open on AI technology. When you test a suspicious flow of funds and try those systems to explain it by knowing the rules, what those typical behaviors would look like. So this, we are grabbing the knowledge from anti-money laundering, and we see, okay, this company should behave in this, and it's not behaving. So let's AI or any other technology you want to implement there, let's try to clear this transaction. Let's try to convince what this company can do, because usually they're completely different. I work for private and public sector. I don't think I can disclose our customer's name. Okay. Good try. Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation today. My question is around, we know that some government entities are looming with their CBDC offerings also to try to combat money laundering. Do you believe that maybe your system would challenge those and keep it more open so the business can still thrive? Because the main issue is that in any of those cases that can be a sort of bottleneck to the fluent ongoing business within the companies. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So CBDCs are completely different in their nature. They're like developed for different purposes. And I need to say one thing to answer your question completely. When you look at the history of cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, yeah, the very first one, it was designed to money transfer outside of the banking system, and the idea behind of this was to give your money to yourself, no intermediaries like banks, etc. And with the CBDCs, we are still talking about third parties like banks and the owners of your account. So what we are targeting right now is more focused on the traditional cryptocurrencies, because the problem, the nature of the crime, as I said before, criminals are very intelligent guys, and they notice, okay, banks know only what happened on their roof, so I will switch banks and they will lose track of my activity. And then I will, for example, put a crypto on those, and then those banks that I have accounts in there lose track what I'm doing, and then I go to, for example, real estates I buy directly for crypto, and they lose track for those. So the criminals are focused on the visibility of their action. They win when the investigator surrender and cannot have more question, because that source of funds seems to be legit, but they don't know what what was the source of funds. For example, I'm going to the bank and I'm putting there like $50K, and I'm saying that's from selling my Rolex, and they ask where you get Rolex from. I say from my father, and they lose track of it because there's no investigation to work on. And the crypto essence on that is they lose view for the transactions because of crypto, because when the criminal or intelligence mention yeah, I have that from crypto, yeah, you ask question, you go to blockchain and you do your part of investigation, etc. And after that, you know that the crypto comes from wallets. At some point, wallets related to regimes. Because when you see the whole network of transactions, if you're persistent, you can find connection, even manually if you're really persistent. But there's a system for that too. With the CBDC, the conception is very different. You gain governmental money from governmental trust issuers like central banks or commercial banks, but there's no need to cover the track as well as from crypto. Maybe in the spot they like you get Bitcoin and you buy like Cyber Euro or something like that. But no, we are like focusing on those black spots that are there. Thanks for the question. I hear you.
Anyway, I would like to ask one question. How does Poland position itself right now in the counter money measures adopted within the EU? Are we a leader of innovation, let's say, or perhaps other initiatives that have been
with the you mean with the technology or combating financial crimes?
Both.
Okay. With the technology, we're very good with that. We are developing a lot of solutions, and we are trying to find innovative ways to solve the problems. The problem with the Polish market, I would say, it's yet to be focused on the problems of tomorrow's, not today. Because we are trying to focus mostly the problems that we face today, and we should switch our approach because we are seeing those problems that are going to us and we're not focusing on it yet. Like, for example, AI. AI is a very nice technology. It's very good to implement it even in combating financial crimes, but it has its limitation. It cannot be like answer for all the problems that are on the market. Like AI will do it. No, it won't. It will supplement what you're doing. It will make it better. It will make it faster. But it's not so. It's a technology like blockchain, AI. This is a tool, and you need to use it as a tool. And Poland, as I said before, we are joining the race. We are trying to solve the problems of today with the technology that we are riding on like a horse. Yeah, I will solve everything. No, it won't. But if you take a step back and you think about it, okay, it can help, but we need to combine that. My personal opinion, like combining AI with quantum computing, it's a great solution. Like, for example, imagine you're combating financial crime, and you have a risk score of your customers. So what it's related with, like your transactions, and it's monitored like couple times in a week because you have those alerts, those happen, there are batches, and you work on that. Imagine that you work on every action of the customer and on every behavior of the customer. Like you look in the application. Usually, like for example, fraudster, they are not going with the applications like I don't want to see my account very often, or I don't want to contact my branch manager, because I want to, you know, fraud the money, so I'm focusing on specific aspects, and normal people are using those types. And when you think about that, combining AI with quantum computing, with processing such huge amount of data, will be a revolution. So yeah, going back to your question about combating money laundering. My personal opinion is that, we are like now focusing on I would say wrong things. And this is not a problem of Poland. This is a general problem in the European Union. So we're like focusing on getting all of the documentation, all of the necessary steps, and we take a risk-based approach for a reason. Risk-based approach is that you recognize risk, you're aware of it, and at some point you're accepting it, and at some point you are saying, no, it's too risky for me. And this should be our approach, but we went from that direction, and we started to gaining all of the documentation we want to protect ourselves, then really focusing on the modern problems, like the one I described, or like Chris will be describing, like deepfakes, and that's a bad thing. But on the strong side, we are good with combating what we know, and we are good with recognizing those patterns. We have good analysts here. We have very talented people here that are good at their work. Several of those are here on this here, and you know, this is a good thing. But we need to, you know, open our minds to there are new problems, and we cannot solve it the old way. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for questions.
Thank you, Robert, for your... Thank you for sharing your brilliant thoughts and interesting presentation. And now please welcome Mateusz Grosicki, our attorney, specialist at AML, compliance and white-collar crime lawyer.
Dzień dobry, witam Państwa. Ja w ramach odmiany dzisiaj troszkę po polsku. Szanowni Państwo, ja mam przyjemność kierować zespołem prawa karnego i compliance w ramach naszej kancelarii jako wspólnik. I dzisiaj chciałem Państwu opowiedzieć o przestępstwach białych kołnierzyków 2.0. Na początku chciałbym zdefiniować to pojęcie przestępstw białych kołnierzyków. Generalnie te przestępstwa odnoszą się do przestępstw, które są popełniane w środowiskach biznesowych, ale nie tylko, bo też w administracji publicznej. I my jako zespół prowadzimy tego typu postępowania i postępowania wyjaśniające w przedsiębiorstwach i w administracji publicznej. I troszkę o tej praktyce też Państwu dzisiaj mam nadzieję opowiedzieć. To są najczęściej działania o wysokiej specjalizacji. Często one są niewidoczne dla pracowników czy dla kadry zarządzającej i najczęściej one są realizowane w legalnie funkcjonujących organizacjach, które są maskowane pod rutynowymi czynnościami procesów gospodarczych. Jak Państwo zapewne wiedzą, te przestępstwa i nadużycia menedżerskie najczęściej były kwalifikowane jako nadużycia gospodarcze, oszustwa finansowe, jako działania na szkodę spółki, korupcję, insider trading czy manipulacje rynkowe. Natomiast dlaczego ja dzisiaj mówię o przestępstwach białych kołnierzyków 2.0? Dlatego, że znacząco zmienia nam się model prowadzenia działalności gospodarczej i źródła, które są wykorzystywane do prowadzenia tej działalności, bo dzisiaj dane są walutą większości przedsiębiorstw. Drodzy Państwo, ta transformacja cyfrowa biznesu, ale też administracji publicznej powoduje to, że często to, co rozumiane było dawniej jako podejmowanie decyzji na papierze przez podpisanie umowy, przez wysłanie transferu środków finansowych. Dzisiaj te decyzje podejmowane są na przykład w formie zarządzania elektronicznym obiegiem dokumentów, w EZD, w systemach, które są wykorzystywane do bieżącego zarządzania przedsiębiorstwem, a nawet w Excelach czy wideokonferencjach, bo tam często też są pewne decyzje podejmowane i w ten sposób manipuluje się danymi. Dlatego kluczowym punktem dzisiejszego mojego wystąpienia jest kwestia dowodów cyfrowych, które radykalnie zmieniają sposób rozumienia odpowiedzialności menedżerskiej, bo ukrywanie decyzji, które są podejmowane przez zarząd, jest coraz trudniejsze. Zawsze można było powiedzieć, że ja tej decyzji nie podjąłem, nie ma namacalnego dowodu, natomiast dzisiaj czy na mailach, czy w metadanych danych plików, czy w korespondencji WhatsAppowej, czy innych komunikatorów, często menadżerowie podejmują kluczowe decyzje dotyczące działalności przedsiębiorstwa. Drodzy Państwo, w ramach typologii i nowych obszarów nadużyć, chciałem Państwu opowiedzieć o tej kwestii, przechodząc dalej, żebyśmy zrozumieli, jak wyglądają współczesne przestępstwa białych kołnierzyków. Generalnie istota tych przestępstw się absolutnie nie zmieniła. Dalej chodzi o to, żeby zyskać na tym przestępstwie i żeby uzyskać pewne korzyści, czy też z nadużycia pozycji, czy z zaufania, czy też dostępu do danych. To, co się zmieniło, to tak naprawdę zmieniły się środki, tempo i skala działania. Ta pierwsza grupa to są dalej cyfrowe oszustwa księgowe i finansowe. I w przedsiębiorstwach, i w administracji publicznej często podejmowane są decyzje nie wprost poprzez właśnie wysłanie transferu, ale na przykład poprzez ustawianie zamówień publicznych w ten sposób, że przesyłane są środki również poniżej tego progu, gdzie te zamówienia publiczne muszą się odbywać. Natomiast często w dzisiejszej dobie tych zautomatyzowanych procesów algorytmy księgowe pozwalają na manipulację cyframi i to nie wymaga już tak naprawdę fizycznego fałszowania dokumentacji, a raczej polega na takim subtelnym modyfikowaniu na przykład parametrów algorytmu pliku. Kolejną grupą są przestępstwa związane z danymi. Tak jak powiedziałem na wstępie i chyba wszyscy jesteśmy tego świadomi, że dane są dzisiaj olbrzymią walutą biznesu i olbrzymią wartością, co prowadzi również do nadużyć, czy czynów nieuczciwej konkurencji, czy nielegalnego obrotu bazami danych. Jak wiemy wszyscy doskonale, RODO, które było szumnie wprowadzane w 2018 roku, miało powodować, że nie będziemy już dostawali telefonów z propozycjami nabycia garnków i nie będziemy dostawali dziwnych ofert marketingowych od podmiotów, którym danych nie przekazaliśmy. Natomiast to się niestety dalej dzieje. Firmy dalej obracają naszymi danymi w sposób nielegalny, bez żadnych podstaw. Trzecią grupą tych nowych przestępstw białych kołnierzyków jest wykorzystywanie cyfrowych ciemnych kanałów. Opowiem Państwu w praktyce o tych przestępstwach, które w ostatnim okresie w ramach dużych afer zostały wykryte. Natomiast najczęściej te przestępstwa i te decyzje podejmowane są już nie wprost na spotkaniach, nieoficjalnymi mailami, nieoficjalnymi kanałami, ale właśnie w postaci komunikatorów i wydawania nieformalnych poleceń. W jednym z postępowań, które prowadziliśmy w ramach rozliczania ostatnich 8 lat poprzedników, mieliśmy do czynienia z takim postępowaniem wyjaśniającym, które prowadziliśmy i tam wydawano wprost decyzję o wydatkowaniu środków publicznych, natomiast panowie sprytnie sobie wymyślili, że usuwając wiadomości mailowe uda im się uniknąć tej odpowiedzialności decyzyjnej. Zapominają niestety często, czy pracownicy w sektorze prywatnym, czy publicznym, że usunięcie tego maila ze swojej skrzynki nie powoduje finalnego usunięcia tych danych i w ramach tych postępowań, które prowadziliśmy z serwerów, te dane sobie odzyskiwaliśmy, a część pracowników, która czuła się mobbingowana tymi poleceniami ze względu na ryzyko utraty pracy, po prostu zapisywała sobie te wiadomości w ramach screenów z komunikatorów WhatsAppowych, gdzie również polecenia służbowe dotyczące wydatkowania środków publicznych były przekazywane. Czwarta grupa dotyczy automatyzacji sztucznej inteligencji. Jak powiedział wcześniej Robert, bardzo często zaczynamy już korzystać z oprogramowania, które bazuje na algorytmach, na sztucznej inteligencji. Często instytucje obowiązane są odpowiedzialne również za układanie scenariuszy, które mają wykryć na przykład fraudy. I tutaj odpowiedzialność polega właśnie na tym menadżerze, który proponuje te reguły, bo można te reguły ustawić w taki sposób, żeby część transakcji, które są podejrzane, które mogą być fraudami albo mogą świadczyć o praniu brudnych pieniędzy, przechodzi. I wreszcie piąta grupa, chyba najszybciej rosnąca z naszej praktyki, to jest kwestia trochę rozmycia odpowiedzialności przez pracę zdalną i rozproszoną, bo ten nowy model biznesu powoduje to, że jest brak bezpośredniego nadzoru, jest więcej autonomii decyzyjnej, a co za tym idzie, jest więcej okazji do tego, żeby do tych nadużyć mogło dochodzić. Natomiast zwiększa się rola dowodów cyfrowych i cyfrowej kryminalistyki, którą my też wykorzystujemy w naszej bieżącej pracy i wykorzystują również służby powołane do ścigania przestępstw, więc trzeba sobie zadać kluczowe pytanie, jak one są dzisiaj wykrywane. Można to streścić tak naprawdę w jednym zdaniu. Te dane cyfrowe są fundamentem postępowań wyjaśniających. Bardzo często spotykamy się z sytuacjami, gdzie prokuratura już na wstępnym etapie zabezpiecza sobie dyski twarde, telefony i powołuje biegłych z zakresu informatyki do odzyskania tych danych, nie po to, żeby znaleźć jeden dokument, z którego wynika ten czyn przestępczy i ta decyzja o tym, żeby popełnić to przestępstwo, że doszło do wypełnienia tych znamion, ale żeby odtworzyć cały cykl podejmowania tej decyzji, cały ten łańcuch. Drodzy Państwo, co może być takim dowodem? Tak jak powiedziałem, cyfrowe ślady są odporne na celowe usunięcie. Kiedyś można było spalić dokumentację, powiedzieć, że przenieśliśmy dokumentację księgową z jednego miejsca do drugiego, dokumentacja została zagubiona, zalana, zniszczona, przypadkowo spaliła się w jakimś magazynie. Natomiast biorąc pod uwagę to, jak zmienia się też kwestia zabezpieczania dokumentacji księgowej i jej prowadzenia, a w przyszłym roku przecież wchodzi nam też KSEF, to te cyfrowe ślady są odporne na takie celowe niszczenie. I tak jak Państwu powiedziałem, nawet takie usunięcie maila nie usuwa go z serwera ani z kopii zapasowych, czy też z chmury. Tak samo skasowanie danych w komunikatorze nie usuwa tych metadanych i jest to możliwe do odtworzenia. A w systemach w administracji publicznej nawet usunięcie dokumentów, czy próba usunięcia tych dokumentów, czy nadpisania w historii repozytorium jest też do odtworzenia i to nam się na szczęście w ostatnim roku udawało. Także każda próba zatarcia takich śladów jest kolejnym śladem i kolejnym dowodem w celu wykrycia i ukarania menadżerów. Drodzy Państwo, właśnie w tym miejscu pojawia się rola tej informatyki śledczej, tej cyfrowej kryminalistyki. I tutaj trzeba sobie powiedzieć, że ta rekonstrukcja decyzji, przebiegu podejmowania decyzji rośnie. Tak jak powiedziałem, tutaj nie chodzi już o konkretną decyzję, o konkretne polecenie, ale o cały ciąg zdarzeń, bo te procesy podejmowania decyzji, biorąc pod uwagę zmieniające się otoczenie biznesowe i prawne, rośnie. Drodzy Państwo, jeżeli chodzi też o ten nasz główny temat, czyli o sektor finansowy, jeżeli chodzi o to, czym my się też zajmujemy w ramach zespołu razem z Robertem, czyli o kwestię przeciwdziałania praniu brudnych pieniędzy. No tutaj sobie też trzeba jasno powiedzieć, że właśnie ustawianie tych reguł, ustawianie procedur i ustawianie czerwonych flag, które się pojawiają przy wychwytywaniu tych transakcji, jest też często zależne od człowieka i od tego, jakie reguły on ustawi. I zarówno ustawa o przeciwdziałaniu praniu brudnych pieniędzy, jak również kodeks karny jasno stawiają człowieka na pierwszym miejscu tej odpowiedzialności. Nie można się zasłaniać tym, że algorytm czy pewne reguły, które sobie ustawiliśmy, pozwoliły na to, że przypadkowo przeszły takie transakcje, a członkowie zarządu odpowiedzialni za te procesy AML-owe czy AML oficerowie w przedsiębiorstwach ponoszą przecież odpowiedzialność i finansową, i administracyjną, i karną. Więc logi decyzyjne w systemach AML jasno pokazują, kto odrzucił dany alert, kto zmienił poziom ryzyka klienta, stąd też warto jest ustawiać sobie w instytucjach obowiązanych kilka progów podejmowania decyzji i eskalowania tych procesów. W AML-u nie funkcjonuje dobra wiara, podobnie jak w przypadku ochrony danych osobowych. Działają zasady należytej staranności i udowadniania naszej rzetelnej reakcji na tego typu sytuacje. Drodzy Państwo, kilka przykładów z praktyki na temat przestępstw menedżerskich 2.0 i tego, w jaki sposób one zostały wykryte. Bo nie były to postępowania polegające na przesłuchaniu setek tysięcy osób czy kilkunastu osób podejmujących decyzje, ale w ramach tych postępowań, które Państwu wypisałem, czyli na przykład Volkswagena i Dieselgate, głównym dowodem, który powodował odpowiedzialność karną menadżerów i odpowiedzialność finansową Volkswagena, były dane z modułów sterujących silnikami i historia wersji oprogramowania i to, w jaki sposób Volkswagen manipulował tymi danymi. Szybciutko przejdziemy przez te przykłady, żeby Państwu pokazać, jak te algorytmy są ustawiane celowo w taki sposób, żeby oszukiwać konsumentów czy powodować to, że dochodzi do przestępstw menedżerskich, oszustw i innych przestępstw. To jest też afera Wirecard. Ta afera polegała na tym, że spółka w swoich dokumentach finansowych jednoznacznie pokazywała swoją świetną, stabilną kondycję finansową, wskazywała, że ma zabezpieczone na kontach prawie 2 miliardy euro na kontach azjatyckich. Natomiast gdy śledczy przeanalizowali sobie dane ze służbowej komunikacji, historię e-maili i wiadomości na Telegramie, plus logowania w systemach księgowych, to okazało się, że tych środków właściwie nie ma. Osoby, które ulokowały tam środki, tych środków nie odzyskają. Podobnie było w dosyć głośnej sprawie Facebooka i Cambridge Analytica. Tutaj też kluczowym dowodem nie były tradycyjne dokumenty, ale dane z profili użytkowników i logi z platform analitycznych. Nie wiem, czy Państwo pamiętają tą aferę. Natomiast chodziło tutaj o udostępnianie firmy zewnętrznej naszych danych do celów politycznych, do takiego mikrotargetingu. I choć oficjalne kierownictwo zaprzeczało, że takie decyzje nie były w żaden sposób podejmowane, też na przesłuchaniach w kongresie, to właśnie dzięki tym dowodom cyfrowym te dowody się znalazły. Podobnie jest w przypadku getbacku. Tutaj też kadra menedżerska cały czas wskazywała, że ich działania były zgodne z przepisami, natomiast rejestry tak naprawdę CRM-owe, elektroniczna korespondencja kierownictwa wskazywała na źródło podejmowania decyzji, na osoby, które decydowały o tym, jakie decyzje podejmować i co doprowadziło tak naprawdę do utraty płynności. Podobnie znów w Funduszu Sprawiedliwości, jakby te nadużycia, które zostały wykryte, w jednym przypadku mamy tam sygnalistę, który pewnie będzie korzystał z instytucji małego środka koronnego, natomiast większość dokumentów została zabezpieczona w logach właśnie w elektronicznym systemie obiegu dokumentów i na komunikatorach WhatsAppowych plus nagraniach, z których jasno wynikało, w jaki sposób środki z tego funduszu miały być rozdysponowywane. Natomiast jeżeli chodzi o te przestępstwa związane z AML-em, to mamy przykład na pewno NatWest Group z Wielkiej Brytanii. Bank dostał tam 265 milionów funtów za poważne naruszenia regulacji AML-owych i one właśnie wskazywały, że choć bank nie był współsprawcą prania brudnych pieniędzy, no to tak ustawił swoje systemy, że one na to zezwalały. Bank nie reagował na czerwone flagi, nie reagował na błędy w systemie monitorowania transakcji zgłaszane też przez pracowników i to powodowało odpowiedzialność banku i kadry menedżerskiej. W ramach tej kadry menedżerskiej mamy przykład też pani Brigitte Monson, byłej CEO Swedbanku, która została skazana za to, że podawała w wywiadach i w publicznych komunikatach spółki informacje na temat sytuacji finansowej spółki i tego, że działa ona w sposób rewelacyjny i że również nowe produkty dotyczące AML-u w podmiotach powiązanych w Estonii są, że ta sytuacja finansowa tych spółek jest fantastyczna. I to pokazuje, że nawet taka komunikacja zewnętrzna menadżera na temat sytuacji finansowej spółki, co powoduje znów element podejmowania przez konsumenta decyzji na temat inwestowania swoich środków w danej jednostce, również może stać się podstawą odpowiedzialności menedżerskiej. I chyba największa historia, która się wydarzyła właściwie w październiku tego roku, czyli pan Wang Qiming z Singapuru. Pan był menadżerem w Citibank Singapur, został skazany na 24 miesiące więzienia w ramach zarzutów fałszerstwa dokumentów i znów głównym dowodem była komunikacja WhatsAppowa, którą pan próbował usuwać. To jest bardzo dobry przykład tak naprawdę związku między tym działaniem cyfrowym, usunięcia komunikacji, komunikatora, korespondencji logów, a odpowiedzialnością. To się niestety zdarza i pewnie się będzie zdarzało coraz częściej, biorąc pod uwagę, że przenosimy się do tej kwestii cyfrowej. Natomiast trzeba sobie też jasno powiedzieć, w jaki sposób my jako menadżerowie, jako osoby odpowiedzialne też za pewne procesy w naszych organizacjach, czy AML-owe, czy RODOSkie, powinniśmy budować tą kulturę cyfrową, menadżerską w naszych jednostkach. Ja zawsze będę mówił, że najważniejsze jest szkolenie i realizowanie procesów szkoleniowych i działania uświadamiające. Natomiast ta transparentność procesów decyzyjnych i jasne określenie, w jaki sposób i kto podejmuje decyzje, jest też kluczowa. Kluczowy jest też podział obowiązków i jasne przypisanie, kto jest za co odpowiedzialny. I cyber compliance, czyli bieżące monitorowanie tych procesów, przeglądanie tych ryzyk i ich dostosowywanie do zmieniającego się świata i otoczenia biznesowego. Era cyfrowa, w której jesteśmy, powoduje to, że ona nie eliminuje w żaden sposób odpowiedzialności menedżerskiej. Ona ją wzmacnia tak naprawdę i uwidacznia. Tłumaczenie się, że to nie ja podejmowałem decyzję, bo nie mam jasno przypisanych kompetencji, dobiegła końca, bo jasno i w jasny sposób można sobie odkodować, kto podejmował decyzje i w jaki sposób podejmowane były te procesy decyzyjne. W ramach takiego już podsumowania, to ukrycie śladów to dzisiaj jest kolejny ślad i chciałbym, żebyśmy o tym pamiętali, bo to często umyka i kwestia schowania dokumentów, ukrycia maila czy usunięcia tego maila nie jest żadnym rozwiązaniem problemu, bo bardzo łatwo to odtworzyć. I trzeba sobie też jasno powiedzieć, że odpowiedzialność menedżerska kadry kierowniczej, nie tylko zarządu, jest nieuchronnością. Od tego nie uciekniemy. Tak też zbudowane jest prawo karne, że te osoby piastujące te funkcje kierownicze tą odpowiedzialność w ramach swoich obowiązków ponoszą. I w cyfrowym świecie tak naprawdę nie ma już decyzji, są dowody. I komunikatory, i systemy obiegu dokumentów, i te wszystkie algorytmy i oprogramowania, o których mówił też Robert, stanowią podstawę do tego, żeby tą odpowiedzialność wyciągać. I takie hasło podsumowujące o budowaniu transparentności. Ci, którzy ją budują, mają przyszłość w tym bieżącym świecie. Cała reszta będzie się tłumaczyła i przed GIF-em, i przed KNF-em, a najpewniej też przed sądem i prokuratorem. Dziękuję Państwu.
Bardzo dziękujemy. Zapraszamy teraz pana doktora Macieja Kwietlińskiego.
Ten F11. No, F11.
Odpala prezentację.
No jest.
Ale żeby na pełny ekran.
No to zróbmy przerwę 5 minut i taką szybką 5 minut.
Teraz poradzę, to będzie to.
I szybciutko jeszcze 2 panele. Dobra.
Włączcie. Słyszymy się? O, teraz może. Dobrze, Szanowni Państwo, po tej krótkiej przerwie zapraszamy na kontynuację na wystąpienie naszego kolejnego prelegenta, pana doktora Macieja Kietlickiego.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to be successful. Okay. Muszę mieć mikrofon? Muszę mieć, okay. So I have to use mic. I don't like to, but I have to, so okay. Okay, two, okay. 1 million, 2 million, okay. So could you please turn your take your seats and we can start the new lecture, not maybe a lecture, maybe a speech. Okay, so as I was listening to the Ralph's speech, I couldn't help but smile because it turned out unexpectedly that my remarks would be very similar to his. But to be clear, we just met. We don't met each other. Just met, and I am not the the intelligence officer on the cover. If I were, I will tell you. But what I want to say to you today is the stock market in the face of war, trends and perspectives, because we are now here on the conference about the risks, risks which our country are facing, and not only the risk about the AI and AML and then something like that, but also there are some factors which we have to take into the consideration. Sorry about the disclaimer, but if we are talking about the risks, I am the investment advisor, so we have, the safety first, mine also. And what I want to tell you today about, first thing, as the ancient Roman says, si vis pace parabellum, so if you want a peace, prepare for war. So first thing about the European economy I want to tell you about is the budget of the NATO, of the European NATO countries, which is skyrocketing right now. And if you want to, because of course the Russian conflict. Sorry about my English. I will switch into the Polish if it will be handy, much handy for us. So. Powiem po polsku, będzie łatwiej. Moi drodzy, słuchajcie, o czym wam chcę powiedzieć? Sorry, Ralph, but it will be much easier for me. Yeah. Moi drodzy, pierwsza kwestia, ryzyka, które stoją przed naszym krajem, jeżeli chodzi o naszą gospodarkę. To znaczy, my mówimy dużo o AI, mówimy dużo o właśnie AML-u, mówimy dużo o tego typu wyzwaniach, ale jest jedna kluczowa kwestia. Na pewno część z nas kojarzy takie spółki jak AMD, Nvidia, Oracle, Broadcom. Widzimy, jak te wyceny są naprawdę bardzo, bardzo wysokie, jak te spółki totalnie zyskują ogromnie na giełdzie. Natomiast jest pewien czynnik, jest pewien sektor gospodarki, który rośnie jeszcze szybciej, jeszcze dynamiczniej i pomiędzy tymże sektorem gospodarki, jak się wszyscy domyślamy, chodzi o obronność, a właśnie AI-em jest jeden kluczowy czynnik, który sprawia, że zarówno Chiny, jak i Rosja trzymają nas mocno za gardło. I o tym dzisiaj chciałbym porozmawiać i o ryzykach, które stoją przed właśnie sektorem finansowym z uwagi na, po pierwsze, bardzo przeszacowane wyceny spółek właśnie AI-owych, tak zwanych, spółek obronnych, o których sobie zaraz powiemy, i o tym kluczowym czynniku, o którym założę się, że wszyscy ostatnio słyszeliśmy. Więc pierwsza kwestia. Widzicie Państwo doskonale, w jak dynamicznym tempie planowany jest rozwój sektora obronnościowego w Europie, jak wyglądają wydatki, planowane wydatki, czyli ten szary kolor tutaj, planowane wydatki NATO właśnie na obronność. Do tej pory mieliśmy problem z tym, żeby powiedzmy uzyskać 2% naszego PKB wydatków na właśnie wydatki zbrojeniowe, a teraz już wiele krajów nawet chce osiągnąć poziom 5%. Więc jest to czynnik, w mojej ocenie, silny czynnik fundamentalny, który może potem sprzyjać rozwojowi tychże spółek, ale jak wiemy, stoją za tym ryzyka, o których zaraz Państwu powiem. Dalej, jeżeli chodzi o strukturę wydatków, planowanych wydatków właśnie krajów NATO, jeżeli chodzi tutaj o najbliższe lata, to ta struktura też się zmienia. To znaczy coraz większy udział w wydatkach właśnie, jeżeli chodzi o budżet NATO, mają wydatki na nie tyle systemy obronnościowe, ale wydatki na broń i amunicję, co potem będzie się przekładało na takie, a nie inne wyceny spółek giełdowych. Dalej, co chciałem Państwu pokazać, na pewno słyszeliście Państwo o spółce Nvidia, która ostatnio przekroczyła kapitalizację $4 bilionów, jest aktualnie największą spółką giełdową na świecie. Spółka, która produkuje chipy tak zwane, tak, czyli tutaj bardzo mocno rozwija się w przedmiocie, czy w sektorze AI-owym, natomiast zobaczcie Państwo, to są spółki obronnościowe, o których się niewiele mówi na giełdzie, niewiele się mówi też ogólnie w mediach. Są to spółki, które chociażby tak jak Rheinmetall, która w ciągu 4, prawie 5 lat zyskała 2000% na samej giełdzie. Są to wzrosty wyższe niż spółek AI-owych. Więc o ile wszyscy słyszeli o tych spółkach AI-owych, być może część z Państwa inwestuje na giełdzie, być może nie, to tutaj jest pewna nisza, w mojej ocenie jeszcze po części niezagospodarowana, ale jednak też w dużym stopniu ryzykowna, to znaczy spółki obronnościowe, które, bo coraz częściej też się mówi o tym, że jest nabrzmiewająca bańka na giełdzie, spekulacyjna, jeżeli chodzi o spółki AI, już te głosy pierwsze zaczynają się pojawiać. Natomiast jeżeli chodzi o spółki obronnościowe, w mojej ocenie one fundamentalnie mają spore wsparcie, to znaczy zwiększające się budżety państw europejskich, państw NATO na wydatki, planowane te wydatki w najbliższym czasie. Natomiast to, o czym myślę, że wszyscy słyszeliśmy, czyli metale ziem rzadkich, kluczowy element, jeżeli chodzi o tutaj walkę pomiędzy Chinami, USA, a tutaj Unią Europejską, ponieważ te metale ziem rzadkich, ostatnio była sytuacja, kiedy właśnie Chiny zbanowały USA, jeżeli chodzi o eksport metali ziem rzadkich. Bez tych metali ziem rzadkich nie powstanie żaden półprzewodnik, nie powstanie żaden chip, nie powstanie żadna karta graficzna, laser, czołg, samolot, rakieta, nic, jeżeli chodzi o nowoczesne technologie. Natomiast myślę, że tutaj wnioski, które z tego płyną, mogą być momentami niepokojące. To, o czym wspomniałem, czyli kluczowa kwestia metali ziem rzadkich, tak zwanych, jeżeli chodzi o sektor zarówno nowoczesnych technologii, jak i chodzi o sektor zbrojeniowy. Natomiast pierwsza kwestia, jeżeli chodzi o rolę Chin w metalach ziem rzadkich. Jak Państwo zauważyliście, Chiny, mówiąc krótko, trzymają cały świat za gardło, jeżeli chodzi o właśnie metale ziem rzadkich, które są kluczowe, jeżeli chodzi o rozwój nowoczesnych technologii zbrojeniówki. Oni dosyć to ciekawie zrobili, ponieważ oni niejako rządzą, czy mają pod swoim tutaj władaniem 70% wydobycia, światowego wydobycia metali ziem rzadkich oraz 90% przetwarzania, znaczy przetwórstwa i rafinacji. Więc Chiny, biorąc pod uwagę też ich specyficzny styl polityczny, Xi Jinping, tutaj oni myślą bardzo długoterminowo. To jest zupełnie inne podejście niż w przypadku naszego rynku albo rynku amerykańskiego. W związku z powyższym oni doskonale wiedzą, że możemy mówić sobie o AI, o cyberbezpieczeństwie, o zbrojeniówce, możemy się prześcigać w budowie nowocześniejszych czołgów czy nowocześniejszych systemów, ale bez tychże metali ziem rzadkich nic z tego nie zbudujemy. Cofniemy się do po prostu ery kamienia łupanego i oni w tym przypadku rządzą całym rynkiem w dużym zakresie. Dalej, jeżeli chodzi o naszą Unię Europejską, co może być dosyć niepokojące, to jest to, że w 2024 roku, jeżeli chodzi o import właśnie tych kluczowych metali ziem rzadkich do Unii Europejskiej, 45% pochodziło z Chin, a 28% pochodziło z Rosji. Dokładnie. Więc Russia and China are holding us as our throats in terms of the rare earth metals. W tym przypadku, jak Państwo widzicie, no to jak w takiej sytuacji mówimy sobie dużo, słyszymy jakieś nagłówki polityczne, widzimy naszych polityków, którzy robią sobie zdjęcia koło kolejnych czołgów, rakiet i samolotów kupionych, że rozwijamy systemy nowoczesne naszego kraju. Unia Europejska inwestuje ogromne środki w rozwój właśnie zbrojeniówki, nowoczesnych systemów. No mówmy się teraz, jaka była sytuacja z tym incydentem z dronami, kiedy to rakietami strzelaliśmy do dronów. Mówimy sobie o systemach antydronowych, no to jak my mamy je zbudować, skoro większość niezbędnych surowców do ich stworzenia importujemy z Chin, które jednym kliknięciem mogą to zrobić, zablokować i już to zrobiły, a po drugie importujemy to z Rosji. Dokładnie. Potem jeszcze pokażę, co Europa próbuje z tym zrobić. Natomiast jak ja zobaczyłem ten wykres, no to mnie to trochę zaniepokoiło i zszokowało, szczerze powiedziawszy. Dalej, szanowni Państwo, jeżeli mówimy sobie, dobre, metale ziem rzadkich, ale jak wiadomo, każdy tam ma telefon, w tym metalu są tam metale typu tam orb, id, znaczy kadmu raczej nie, ale jakiś molibden na przykład. Natomiast mówimy sobie, dobra, to są jakieś tam może gramy, tak? Ale zobaczcie Państwo, że to jeżeli chodzi o zbrojeniówkę, to nie jest kwestia, że tam, nie wiem, 2 kg są potrzebne, tylko w takim chociażby czołgu potrzeba 300 kg tychże metali. W samolocie F-35 420 kg. To są już poważne naprawdę wolumeny, jeżeli chodzi. Mogę cofnąć na czołg, jeżeli ktoś potrzebuje, bo widzę, że zdjęcia Państwo robicie. Więc śmiało, ja zejdę z kadru, nie będę psuł kadru, ale czołg 300 kg, samolot 420 kg to są naprawdę potężne wolumeny, jeżeli chodzi o wydobycie tychże metali, które, jak przypomnę, w większości są z Chin i z Rosji. Szanowni Państwo, w tym przypadku, jak już mamy sobie takie, powiedzmy, overview rynkowe, to znaczy po pierwsze budżet NATO, po drugie metale ziem rzadkich, czy kluczowa kwestia, przypomnę, myślę, że wszyscy o tym słyszeliśmy, o tej anegdocie, że kto zarobił najwięcej pieniędzy na tak zwanej gorączce złota w Klondike w XIX wieku w USA. Wcale to nie byli poszukiwacze złota, nie byli to górnicy. Myślę, że każdy z nas ma w domu tak zwane Lewisy, dżinsy Lewisa. Myślę, że każdy je kojarzy. Lewisy, czy Levi Strauss, jak to woli, był to założyciel właśnie firmy, która to wpadł na pomysł, że górnicy potrzebują bardzo wytrzymałych spodni. Więc sprzedawał im dżinsy, Lewisy. To właśnie on sprzedawał im te spodnie i zarobił krocie właśnie na tejże gorączce złota. Zmierzam do tego, że w tym przypadku, o którym rozmawiamy, być może lepiej jest spoglądać w stronę nie tylko tych spółek AI, o których już absolutnie wszyscy słyszeli, i teraz to jest to samo, co było na hoście gamingowej w 2018 roku, być może część z nas pamięta, że jak była lista spółek gamingowych, CD Projekt i tak dalej, w co się nie rzuciło kamieniem, to rosło. W tym przypadku tak samo jest ze spółkami AI. Być może warto spojrzeć w stronę spółek dotyczących właśnie metali ziem rzadkich. Jak to wygląda z punktu widzenia giełdowego? Ja tu widzę spore ryzyka w tym przypadku, to znaczy są to przypadkowe, to są przykładowe, spółki, europejskie spółki zajmujące się zbrojeniówką, spółki bardzo uzależnione od metali ziem rzadkich, czyli ryzykowne, ale teraz Państwu powiem jakie jest myślenie osoby, która inwestuje na giełdzie. Po pierwsze, one są PE ratio, czyli to jest wskaźnik cena-zysk, on pokazuje, czy spółka jest droga, czy jest tania. Co to znaczy 147? To jest dla porównania Nvidia, jak sobie dzisiaj sprawdzałem, spółka, o której wszyscy słyszeli, i im jest wskaźnik wyższy, tym jest drożej ogólnie. Nvidia ma wskaźnik 58, AMD ma wskaźnik 86. Mówimy o niemieckim producencie zbrojeniówki, który jest droższy 3 razy od Nvidii. W dużym skrócie, jak to interpretować, bo może to też pomoże tutaj, żeby to złapać, to znaczy, że jakbym kupił jedną akcję tejże spółki i spółka by wypłacała cały zysk netto w formie dywidendy, to inwestycja zwróciłaby mi się po 150 latach. To jest taki rząd wielkości. Więc spółki zbrojeniowe uzależnione od metali ziem rzadkich, od jednego kliknięcia Xi Jinpinga, który nam może zablokować eksport, są droższe niż AI. W dużym skrócie. To właśnie chciałem głównie Państwu powiedzieć i konkretnie na przykładzie już bardziej takim tutaj konkretnym, spółka, fatalny jest ten mikrofon, ale dobra, spółka niemiecka Rheinmetall, 5 spółek chciałem Państwu pokazać, które są w zbrojeniówce, które są bardzo zależne od metali ziem rzadkich i w razie czego, gdyby na przykład w przypadku tejże spółki, Rheinmetall to jest europejski potentat, jeżeli chodzi o produkcję broni, uzbrojenia, w przypadku gdyby doszło do wstrzymania importu metali ziem rzadkich z Chin, ta wycena może spaść. To są wyliczenia fundamentalne. Analityka, który sobie siedzi tam przed komputerem w domu, myśli racjonalnie i się tam za bardzo nie emocjonuje, może spaść o 12 do 20%. W mojej ocenie, gdyby była informacja, że Chiny nagle zamykają, czy jakoś narzucają nam jakieś restrykcje eksportowe, jeżeli chodzi o metale ziem rzadkich, myślę, że wyceny spadły w ciągu tygodnia po 40%. To jest normalne na giełdzie. Być może Państwo słyszeliście taki off-top o kto jest najbogatszym człowiekiem świata aktualnie. Ale przez 2 dni nie był. Ciepło, ale czy słyszeliście Państwo o spółce Oracle? Na pewno słyszeliście. Dokładnie. W wyniku tego, że Oracle zaraportowało bardzo dobre wyniki oraz tam była kwestia, wystrzelił im popyt na usługi cloudowe, spółka w ciągu 2 sesji wzrosła o 40%, a prezes Timothy Ellis, jeżeli dobrze pamiętam, został przez 2 dni najbogatszym człowiekiem świata. Potem w piątek to było przypadkowo Elon Musk rozpuścił plotkę, że jego robotaksówki świetnie sobie radzą, że będą tam super sprzedawane. Akcje Tesla wzrosły 7%, znowu był najbogatszym człowiekiem świata. Zmierzam do tego, że mówimy sobie o fundamentach, tam oczywiście finanse, twarde rzeczy, bez emocji. Giełda to są czyste emocje. To nie ma nic wspólnego z finansami. Mówmy się, kto ma czas przeglądać sprawozdania finansowe, słuchać analityków. To są czyste emocje. Więc w tym przypadku te spółki typu Rheinmetall na przykład, czy Hensoldt, który jest spółką niemiecką produkującą zaawansowane urządzenia optoelektroniczne, one mogą w mojej ocenie w tydzień stracić po 30-40% na spokojnie. Tutaj w tym przypadku, jak widzicie Państwo, to są wyliczenia już takie bardziej finansowe, tak? Czy chociażby BAE Systems, spółka, która teraz ostatnio było też o niej głośno, spółka specjalizująca się przede wszystkim w rozwiązaniach dla floty, czyli w budowie statków, mówiąc po ludzku, i w budowaniu samolotów. Dalej Leonardo, spółka włoska, która też zajmuje się, jeżeli chodzi o budowę właśnie rozwiązań dla lotnictwa wojskowego, oraz Rolls-Royce, o dziwo, myślę, że każdy tę spółkę kojarzy. Jak się okazuje, jest to spółka, która nie tylko produkuje wyjątkowo luksusowe samochody, ale też jest producentem wyjątkowo wysokiej jakości silników do chociażby samolotów. Dalej, jeżeli chodzi o spółki dla odmiany odporne na wahania, jeżeli chodzi o metale ziem rzadkich, to są spółki z kolei, tutaj wymieniłem Państwu 4 przykładowe spółki, w tym jedna polska, Lubawa chociażby. One, jak widzicie Państwo, też są bardzo drogie, zwłaszcza Avon Protection 127, wspominałem już, że Nvidia to jest około 55. Natomiast Avon Protection, dlaczego te spółki może inaczej? Dlaczego te spółki, jeżeli ktoś się interesuje inwestowaniem, bo chciałby się zainteresować lub na co patrzeć, to jest też taka zasada, że inwestuj, kiedy inni się boją, bój się, kiedy inni inwestują. Ja już się boję spółek AI-owych w tym momencie. Natomiast jeżeli chodzi o spółki tamte odporne pierwsze spółki to były właśnie wrażliwe na wszelkie wahania na metalach ziem rzadkich. Dlaczego były wrażliwe? Ponieważ one wytwarzały broń, amunicję, samoloty, które sobie, jak powiedzieliśmy, zawierają sporo tychże metali. Te spółki zbrojeniowe są odporne z tego względu, że wytwarzają materiały, że wytwarzają elementy uzbrojenia dla żołnierzy typu hełmy, maski, czy inaczej są to pewne elementy ekwipunku osobistego, które nie wymagają właśnie tychże metali ziem rzadkich. Więc z punktu widzenia analityka giełdowego, wchodząc szczegółowo w pewne analizowanie spółek, patrzy się na to, czy w tym przypadku jaka ta spółka ma perspektywy, jeżeli chodzi o przyszłość i jak może być wrażliwa na wszelkie ruchy właśnie tego typu geopolityczne. Dalej spółka czesko-amerykańska, która produkuje właśnie małą broń, czyli raczej tutaj pistolety. Dalej spółka brytyjska specjalizująca się w amunicji, w systemach obrony przeciwlotniczej. I spółka Lubawa, nasza polska, jest też spółka Protektor, o której pomyślałem w tym momencie, to jest producent z kolei obuwia wojskowego. Lubawa, która produkuje kamizelki kuloodporne i teraz wykorzystuje ostatnią sytuację, która miała miejsce w Polsce, to znaczy wchodzi w systemy antydronowe. I teraz kluczowa kwestia, bo mówiliśmy sobie o tym, że jeżeli chodzi o ten nasz rynek, jeżeli chodzi o Europę, jeżeli chodzi o metale ziem rzadkich, jeżeli chodzi o sektor zbrojeniowy, no my jesteśmy w dużym stopniu uzależnieni niestety od Rosji, od Chin, ale pytanie, czy w jakim stopniu próbujemy sobie z tym poradzić jako Unia Europejska. Okazuje się, że pierwsza kwestia, czy możemy te metale skądinąd pozyskiwać. Okazuje się, że są pewne źródła tychże. Są to Stany Zjednoczone, Kanada, tutaj kraje Ameryki Łacińskiej, RPA, Australia i Indie. Przy czym orientujemy się, że tutaj jeżeli chodzi o Indię, mogą być pewne problemy geopolityczne. Kraje Ameryki Łacińskiej też to różnie bywa. Z USA jako z partnerem handlowym, no wiemy, że one są dosyć mało stabilne, zwłaszcza z punktu widzenia współpracy z prezydentem. Natomiast nasza tutaj wspólnota europejska podejmuje pewne działania i mianowicie wdrożono taką paneuropejską inicjatywę, to się nazywa CRMA, która to ma nas jako Unię Europejską w pewnym stopniu uniezależnić od właśnie tych metali ziem rzadkich, żebyśmy już nie musieli 45% pozyskiwać z Chin i 28% z Rosji. Więc w tym przypadku do 2030 roku są dosyć ambitne cele, jeżeli chodzi o właśnie tę inicjatywę. To znaczy powyżej 10% ma być własnej ekstrakcji tychże strategicznych metali, o których sobie rozmawiamy. Powyżej 40% mają być właśnie przetwarzane, powiedzmy tutaj tak, domestically, czasem angielski jest łatwiejszy, w naszej wspólnocie. 15% pochodzi z recyklingu i tutaj mają być też limity, jeżeli chodzi o import, żeby jeden partner handlowy nie dostarczał więcej niż 65% na przykład iterbu, czyli to jest metal ziem rzadkich. W tym przypadku, jeżeli chodzi o spółki, które w naszej tutaj wspólnocie mogą na tym zyskać, okazuje się, że nawet Polska może coś na tym ugrać, zwłaszcza Grupa Azoty, jeżeli chodzi tutaj o nasz rynek i jeżeli chodzi o tutaj właśnie spółka mKango. Więc krótko mówiąc, jaki jest przekaz tego mojego dzisiejszego wykładu? Szybko mówię, ponieważ jesteśmy godzinę po czasie, a chcę wyjść trochę naprzeciw. Szanowni Państwo, pierwsza kwestia, jak to wszystko wygląda. To znaczy, jeżeli chodzi z punktu widzenia inwestycyjnego i giełdowego, to z jednej strony mówimy sobie o AI, o tej bańce, która teraz bardzo mocno narasta. Z drugiej strony mówimy też o sektorze obronnościowym, który jak właśnie widzimy rośnie jeszcze dynamiczniej niż właśnie spółki AI-owe, ale znowu jakby kluczem do jednego i drugiego są metale ziem rzadkich, o których się z jakiegoś powodu niewiele mówi, ale jeżeli z tymi metalami będzie problem, czy to jeżeli chodzi o narzucenie jakichś limitów eksportowych, czy to jeżeli chodzi o chociażby inne jakieś działania polityczne, w tym przypadku oba te sektory w dużym stopniu ucierpią, co z kolei dla osoby interesującej się giełdą może to stanowić bardzo ciekawą okazję do kupna spółek w znacznie niższej cenie. Ale w tym przypadku, dlatego właśnie Państwu podam dwie grupy tychże spółek i odporne na kwestie restrykcji eksportowych, jeżeli chodzi o metale ziem rzadkich, i spółek mniej odpornych, że można sobie było to porównać. Jeżeli chodzi o tutaj kwestię właśnie implementacji tej strategii CRMA, to są w mojej ocenie 4 spółki dosyć ciekawe, które mogą na tym ewentualnie potencjalnie skorzystać. Jedna z nich jest spółką polską. Te spółki zajmują się głównie właśnie wytwarzaniem, czy może wydobyciem bardziej metali ziem rzadkich, więc one mogą być dosyć ciekawe do obserwowania. Dziękuję serdecznie za uwagę.
Bardzo dziękujemy za to wystąpienie. Teraz przechodząc do kolejnego naszego prelegenta, zapraszamy panią Joannę Grünfelder, Krakow School of Business, eksperta w zakresie compliance i AML-u.
So the presentation will be about the topic that there is no more any sense in fighting money laundering, preventing money laundering at banks, because we are, in fact, in traditional way of fighting money laundering, and words is spinning around, and money launderers are in internet right now. But I was kidding a little bit. I would tell you about the challenges, because now we are facing the reality that money knows no borders, right? And we are facing the reality of people moving, of free movement of people and funds around the Europe, and not only around the Europe, but all over the world. If you are in Poland, you can see a shop named Żabka, the frog, the green one. And in Żabka, you can buy a coupon, a special coupon, a safe pay card that can be used in the internet. The maximum value of this card is 100 Polish zloty. It's estimated about 40 US dollars. Yeah. And you can use this PaySafe card in the internet. And you can buy this coupon anonymously. You can buy it by cash. You can buy it by card. And then you can use this coupon in the internet by buying different goods. You can use it for games. You can exchange this coupon for another equivalent of money in the internet. And then you can do whatever you want. And you can use this coupon with unregistered entity, not regulated, not places anywhere physically, just in the internet. So how can I catch a fraudster or a money launderer at a bank? So the question is, how compliance in the EU financial sector can keep up with the global client mobility? It's not easy. Of course, AI, tools, sophisticated software. But we are facing, it costs a lot. So it's not for free, it's not free of charge. If you want to implement a sophisticated software at a bank, it costs millions of Polish zloty. And you need people for servicing this. You need to update the system. And financial institutions, costs are going into millions. So we are facing issues like, for example, global variety of identity documents for different jurisdictions. So in Poland, we are really happy because for Polish citizens, for Polish nationals, we've got Polish IDs. And we can validate this ID against the national database of IDs. So it's easy. But I cannot imagine how financial institution is dealing with those IDs without any availability of validation of such ID. Because using of forged document is so easy. Possessing of forged document is so easy. And if you are going to launder money in Poland in the bank, that's really easy. Just use the passport that cannot be validated against any database. We are talking about AI, machine learning, sophisticated tools, but the simplest way is always the most efficient. Client onboarding, of course. The new regulations and one EU wallet will be a good solution for EU citizens. That would be perfect, because the validation of our identities will be in one place and can be used by financial institutions. But what with the people that don't want to use these electronic tools? They don't want to install any application on their phones, or they even don't want to have a phone. So they are clients as well. And we cannot reject those clients. We cannot refuse to establish a relationship with someone who doesn't possess a mobile phone. It doesn't, and in fact, of course, the security codes are going to be sent to his mobile phone, but there is no obligation to do this. The person can go to the bank and be serviced by the clerk, by the relationship manager in place. So then we've got digital adoption of documents. Definitely we need a database, access to database of documents, not only electronic documents, but also hard copies, hard documents. What does it mean? I was facing an issue with a client from Sri Lanka. And banks are commonly, and not only banks, because we are talking about a wide range of financial institutions, which are not only financial institutions, but very obliged institutions. So, I mean, all of those thousands of entities that need to fulfill provisions of the Polish AML Act and European Act as well. And I was facing the issue with the client from Sri Lanka. He was in the bank. He was presenting with a hard copy of the document, of his passport. And what does obliged institution is doing in that way? Because we are talking about physical presence in the branch. We are searching within Prado. Prado is a big database with documents from all over the world. And in Prado, you can search it by yourself. That's your homework. There is only a driving license for Sri Lanka. Of course, you can, because you know how to do this, you can go to another database, to Edison, which is a police database from Netherlands. Okay, let's go to this database, but there are some passports. Yeah, good to know. And then we can see that the latest passport has been issued in the latest version of the passport that was on this website, on Edison website, was from 2022. And we know on the web and we know in the internet that there's the newest version of the passport with an electronic layer. So in fact, we could have in some way access to this electronic database, or we could, for example, identify this person using NFC, because this passport has got an NFRD chip that is readable by quite sufficient solution that allows to read such passport and verify identity by NFC. There is a long short story about fraudsters in Poland. So in Katowice, Silesian region, on the south of Poland, we had investigation, uncovered a criminal group, several persons, and they used forged documents, hard copies of documents, passports that were stolen or forged or lost. Can you guess how many accounts were opened physically in Polish banks? We are talking about 10 people. They were acting for 3 years, and they were more than 80. They were more than 80 victims from. The victims were from 80 countries, and those accounts were used for transferring money, because that's the reason why criminals need banks to transfer money. Sometimes they want to have a credit card, a fancy one, just to pay or to connect with his Apple Pay. How many accounts? 10 people during 3 years, using stolen, forged, or lost documents. I'll let you guess. 5,000. No, don't exaggerate. It's only 1,600. So nothing. And what's the issue? As a bank employee, I don't have access to the database of such accounts. I don't know which one was opened based on the forged ID, because we are not informed by anyone. So that's the real example with the link to the case, very, very interesting one. And another topic, still faked IDs. So that's what I said. I cannot imagine how you can identify identity, verify identity of anyone who is presenting you with his plastic card, his plastic identity, or even a booklet, this hard copy of a passport, without verification of the data within with external database. If I could, I've got one collector's ID. Collector's ID are not legal in Poland just since 2018. And we don't know how many accounts were opened based on such IDs. You can order such ID even for your dog or for your cat. The only reason is that those companies, producers of such IDs, are hidden. They are not in Poland, registered in Poland anymore because it's illegal. They are just abroad. And the price that was previously about $100 now is about, it's tripled or even, it's tripled. So that's only difference. There are some forums, internet forums, that you can choose which document do you want. You can choose driving license, you can choose ID, you can choose passport, you can choose temporary permit residence card, whatever you want, just pay. And don't let you catch. So that's the topic, of course, harmonization of European Union, harmonization of databases, European wallet, AI, tools, etc. All seems perfect as a project. They are projects that can deal, with those projects, with these solutions, can deal big financial institutions, but as we know, there are other institutions, not so big, not so rich, and they cannot afford for such AI solutions or sophisticated software for identification of verification of a client. Beneficiary owners. I really don't know how to say, but I'm really sad about this. Because the biggest issue is with the verification of beneficiary owners in cross-border structures. Because we are facing some issues with the law, for example. For example, trusts. We've got some legal entities like trusts in Western Europe, especially popular, for example, in the UK. But in Poland, such legal entity doesn't exist. But such legal entity as trust can be a beneficiary owner of can be an owner of a company in Poland. No obstacles. So then we can use different legal systems. We need to find a solution. Who is the beneficiary owner? But of course, in our AML Legal Act, we've got a solution that shows you who is the beneficiary owner for the trust, but such entity doesn't exist in Poland formally, because cannot be registered here. Quality and availability of UBO registers. UBO register, it's a register when all beneficiary owners are registered, should be registered, but in fact, the quality of such registers is really poor. Because of why? Because clients don't know who is the beneficiary owner, and they just put the data suggested by the lawyers. Sometimes they want to hide a real beneficiary owner, and they are doing this assessing the risk. And then and there is a really important topic in Europe now, because when beneficiary owners registers were established, they were wide open and with free access. So they were publicly available. And since the Court of Justice rule in 2022, access to those registers is limited. Is going to be limited, and even Polish CRBR, Polish Register of Beneficiary Owners, will be closed for public review. It will be still accessible for obliged institutions and for journalists and for the companies who are collecting data, which is good. But the register will be closed for public review. And that's a funny story because some years ago, I was in Luxembourg in a European law school era. And after all lectures, we were sitting at the table, drinking good French wine. And I was sitting next to nice lawyers from Luxembourg. And they were talking about interesting case they handling. It was about the client, that he was not very happy with his data disclosed in the central register, company's register in Luxembourg as beneficiary owner. And he decided to fight for this right for his privacy. And that was that case. That was that case that finalized in this Court of Justice ruling in 2022, and based on which those beneficiary owners registers across the Europe were in fact closed for publics. So in fact, it was all about the wine. And another change. On paper, it looks really good. No, maybe not so scary. It was 25% plus 5. When you want to establish a beneficiary owner, you had to establish who is possessing the rights or shares of the company, and in the equivalent 25% plus 1. And it was more than 25. And now the level is lowering. It will be 25. What does it mean? It means that all obliged institutions, all financial institutions, need to verify beneficiary owners again, and they have to ask their clients again about the data. But it's not so easy because the range of data is much wider than before. And we need to ask our beneficiary owner, for example, for his address, which has never ever happened before. So we need a new set of data to be collected. And we have no space in our systems. And we need to work on this because we need some space in our CRM systems just to collect the data, to put the data. And another topic, GDPR, because our data protection authority is not very keen on document copies. I'm not very keen on document copies as well because it's easier than before to forge a document, to make a PDF from PDF or open a PDF and put another data. It's easy. So it means that we need to find a way how to collect the data from the beneficiary owner. Probably we would need to verify this ID against what? Any database. I don't know why. We are working on this. And just an example, access to European databases, beneficiary owners, database registers, it's restricted for from country nationals. So I cannot access beneficiary owner register in Austria, even when I'm holding ID with this electronic layer. I cannot access Cypriot one. And so, but my obligation is to verify data from that register before the client is onboarded. So it's really tough. Geographic risk, it's a pain because in every single country, rules are different. In fact, we are relying on the same lists like FATF lists, European third high country lists, but every country has got his own list as well. Because, for example, of the sanctions, because we've got sanction topics, very, very important. We've got such lists like, for example, that we are getting this 0-1 approach. We are calculating the risk arising from place of birth, nationality, place of living, city of birth, which is, I don't know why regulators are still forcing us to possess this information about city of birth. I don't know why. I know the reason, because from the attack on World Trade Center, FATF issued a recommendation. FATF, it's a general organization that is issuing AML and financial terrorist financing, combating terrorist financing standards. They are pointing out that we should assess also the risk related to geography, like I said, place of birth or nationality. But in Europe, maybe I'm just lucky that I was born in Poland and I've got Polish passport, which is sometimes in some countries low risk and in some countries medium risk. It depends from the country. It really depends. So there is no one unique approach to geographic risk, and we are calculating this risk very, very strictly, but we need more risk-based approach to this. And we need to have a lot of exemptions. So it doesn't mean that someone from Vietnam is more risky than someone who was born in Poland. And we are going to the topic of de-risking. In Poland, in fact, you cannot refuse to open the account to someone because of his nationality, because it's illegal. It's discrimination. And this is quite a risk-based approach used by Polish banks, because we've got strictly defined rules. When can we refuse opening the account, or can we terminate the relationship? So those points are really clear, but we cannot rely only on one, for example, nationality. But many institutions are just ignoring this rule, and they are not letting clients go because of third high country list. They don't want clients from the third country list. Because of why? I will show you. Because when you are in Vietnam, Vietnam is on third high country risk, and you are using your credit card on the airport. Your transaction is related, in fact, according to this law, to AML law in Poland, to the third high country from the list. Very, very dangerous. And despite of the value of this transaction, and you will become a high-risk client. So please be aware that someone from the bank will contact you and will ask about your details, and will ask about your source of wealth, source of funds, and we ask more details about your personal expenses, because it's required, because local regulator doesn't decide to exclude low-value transactions from this rule. But yes, not risk-based approach. But in other countries, there is a risk-based approach. So in Poland, don't be surprised that you will be asked about some details. Sorry for that, not my fault. And another approach, we've got no database of dual citizenships. We have no access to we're asking this question to clients, but of course they can refuse to answer. We are obliged to collect any information about any citizenship, in fact. We should collect this data, but we cannot avoid the situation when we will open the account for a Russian with Hungarian passport or Maltese passport, because Schengen visas are still in place. They are still in place. But now not directly, but through investments, so-called investments. And it's widely and common used in the internet. There are many, many websites that offering help for possessing such investment visa. And practical challenges, documents, language, source of wealth, and funds. As I said, you can be asked for proofing of your source of wealth or your source of fund. And you can provide me with your bank statement, with the logo, with transactions, but I cannot be 100% sure that this document is real. I can just trust you. Real-time deepfakes. I don't know who is, video verification, it's very risky because of deepfakes. I probably, all of you, so how can you create a movie using only one picture, right? The first company that was using this was Microsoft. It was a year and a half ago. This is Vasa project, and they started to use AI, so you can create a real-time movie using only one snapshot, one picture. And it was in 2024. And now we are at the end of 2025, and technology grows. And that was old story right now. We can make a movie easily by ourselves, but using tools that are free of charge. They are not complicated. Additional example, that was quite widely known on the internet. A guy from Poland was promoting his startup, and he created forged copy of his passport, but in fact this copy contains a lot of mistakes, but he tried to prove that he participated and passed KYC processes at Revolut. In fact, I don't believe it because there were too many mistakes on this document, but in fact it was generated by AI. But that was just the beginning, because I can see in my eyes of imagination that there will be some kind of fate. There is, in fact, some kind of fate between AI tools used by financial institutions to verify biometrics, pictures, behavior, and fraudsters and criminals. They are using same tools, but against tools used by financial institutions. That's natural. So also, the first bank in Poland that was using NFC verification of passport, these NFRD chips, was Ion Bank, Belgian-based one, now bought by UniCredit. But they started to verify passports first in Poland, I think. Yeah, but soon probably all financial institutions, obliged institutions, will have access to passport databases. So also with the picture, because this NFC verification works that you need to stick your passport to your phone with software, and then the software is reading your chip, and then person in the bank is seeing all details of your passport, including your picture, and can verify your identity, your picture. You know what? Going to the end, we need very good skilled people, because normal analyst is not enough right now. We need to have tools to assess if the document was AI generated. And in fact, we have no software for this. We should also, we've got also, deepfake regulation is still developing in Europe. And it will, our Data Act will be in force in 2026, as I remember, but it's too late. Since 2024, when Microsoft saw his Vasa project, shown his Vasa project, till 2026, it will be just too late. So, the conclusion. conclusion is that at the end, to open the account, we will need go to a bank without passports, to show ourselves, to be verified both by AI tool and by the relationship manager in a bank, and then we will put our signature, wet signature, on a paper. Thank you. Question? Yeah. Questions? Questions?
Oh, yeah, thanks. So my question is, how do you see a future of banking sector? Because as you mentioned several times, there's a need for more compliance tools that will help you work in your daily job. And on the other hand, there's too much technology on the criminal side, and those guys are also getting this type of technology that the banks used to, pioneer in the in that aspect. So we are like fighting a battle of who's better prepared with deep fakes, all of that. So you see future of banking like digital one, like you use most complex tools, like I was talking about like quantum computing, AI supported different kind of system, or you think that we're gonna go back to basis, and when you want to make a wire transfer, you have this cards like back then in Poland, like you need to zip the code from the card and then make a transfer.
I remember the zipping of the codes on a card. Yeah, it's hard to say. In fact, digitalization is one thing, and old-fashioned banking is another way. I think that we will stay with investment banking, with loans and credits for big for the companies. And banks for individuals, for physical clients, will be killed by fintechs. Why? Because I'm from Generation X, and we've got people from Generation Z, as we saw at the beginning. So people from the Generation Z are not very, I don't know how to say, they don't care if their money is safe. Why I'm telling this? Because they are using a lot of fintechs. They are putting their money on this, and they don't care if this money is, for example, safe, on segregated account, reconciliated daily. They don't care. They just need to have money, the whole world in palm of their hand, right? That's all. They just need access to their money. We've got a big issue with konotoxia in Poland. So it was exchange of money, exchange of currency, but no one was caring about the safety of money. No one. People were exchanging large amount of money, and money was not segregated, not kept on segregated accounts. And that's the reason I think that it will be that traditional banking will be killed by fintechs.
Thank you very much. One more question from my side. Do you believe that future of financial sector challenges like anti-money laundering, frauds, all of those will change in aspect of adoption of CBDC? Like this will be much more stricter monitored because of the current infrastructure is lack of compliance in the current infrastructure relies from the technology and from the design, and CBDC will be created to permanent observation of the financial patterns. Do you believe that will change a lot in banks, or do you believe, let me put that into a context, that AML and anti-fraud aspect will be transferred back to the authorities, which will directly control the financial network and push bank of this obligation? Because right now it's very hard for those authorities to work on spreaded financial sector, like one thing happen in one bank, another thing happen in another, and you need all of the access to this information. There's no network that combine all of those information. You need to grab parts of it and then put it in a track. With CBDC, that will be different. And do you believe that will push AML and anti-fraud from the banks, or you believe that will, still there?
I really don't know what to expect. I really don't know, because now let's our regulators to accept our local cryptocurrency regulation, right? Which is still not in place. Yeah.
They should start.
They should start we are starting from the scratch. One database is really good, but I'm in financial world over 20 years, and we still have no one database of accounts. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Joanna, for your presentation and these grateful thoughts. And last but not least, please welcome PhD Piotr Kotlarz from University of Oxford.
Mikrofon bez kabelka, czy musi być na kabelku? On chyba widział. Chyba cię na kabelku. Dobra, to zrobimy tak jak jest. Sekundkę, może tak byśmy... Jeśli widać, dobra. Dobra. It's working, great. Cool. Okay. Just put the timer. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's working. Oh, that's even too strong. Okay, so good evening. Welcome to my presentation about AI influence and systemic risk in financial markets. First of all, thank you for having me here. Thank you for inviting me here for the conference. Maybe a couple of words what I'm going to talk about. So today I would like to connect, let's say, 3-4 terms, key terms that are usually kind of kept separated, I would say, underrepresented, unresearched in the field. So the market narratives, so all the information from the social media, artificial intelligence as a tool for processing this social media narratives. Then those two terms combined together and related systemic risk. And on top of this, I will talk a bit of trading, so the applications of the social media and the AI for trading. So yeah, briefly about me. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Piotr Kotlarz, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Oxford at the Nuffield College. I'm also assistant professor at the Koźmiński University here in Warsaw. And in addition to this, I am independent consultant, independent researcher. So overall, in my career, in my work, I always try to bridge the academic knowledge, academic research with some real-world application for business and basically everything that can be applied in real terms. So let's start with the roadmap. So what I'm going to talk about today. So the first point, of course, some introduction for you. So the thesis and the context. So why the AI influence matters for the European financial markets. The second point, we'll go more into, let's say, micro level. So we will look at the evidence from the influencers. So the social media in this terms, it's a Twitter. Later, I will show you, I will explain the mechanism, so what's behind the influence, so how the influence from the social media go to the financial market and also to the systemic risk. I will show a couple of examples, case snapshots, so of some flash events and market disruptions. Then I will walk through the risk channels and the risk channels that lead to the stress, to the systemic stress. Then a bit of the law, since we are in the European Union, so of course the European AI Act and compliance. Then a bit of the risk management framework, so the framework to regulate the market, to regulate the AI. Then I would say the most interesting applicable side, so our project from Oxford, so AI-driven social media market signals. I will show you how we obtain the data from the social media, how we process the data through some AI engines, we generate trading signals, and I'll show you how we estimate the market sentiments and the trading signals, which then are, of course, implemented on the stock exchange. And at the end, of course, some conclusion and Q&A session to finish the discussion. Great. So let's start with the first point. So today, the stock market, the financial markets operate in entirely different information environment as it was, let's say, 10, 20 years ago. If we move back 10, 20 years ago, it took so much time to transfer, to transit the message to analysts. It took hours, days, and so on. Today, the speed of the narratives is enormously high. So the social media post might trigger the price movement already within the minutes, not hours. So that the message, the social media tweet can spread around the globe very, very quickly. The second point, back then, usually the institutional investors took the lead. So basically, they dictated the markets. So they had influence, they had impact to move the prices. However, today it's different. So there is the retail investors, and of course the influencers and the retail investors following those influencers. So just a couple of numbers, maybe examples for you. So in the US market, 20 to 25% of the volume is driven actually by the retail investors. If you look at some stocks that are more popular, like the GameStop, the meme stock, and so on, the ratio, the portion of the retail investor is there around 60 to 70%. So in simple words, the retail clients, retail investors can really shape the order flow, so have impact on the stock price and stock movements. The third point that I would like to address is, of course, the algorithmic herding. So in simple words, if we all look at the same data, we look at the same market news, we follow the same rules, of course, we do the same actions. So this leads to the so-called algorithmic herding. So everyone follows the same signals, the same trades, which can be assigned to the same methodology, also to the same influencers that we follow on Twitter or similar platforms. Finally, I believe that Europe, the European Union, requires some framework, some regulation for this to address those issues. So of course, there is a strong need for the framework for market integrity, transparency, and oversight. So I think the good starting point is, of course, the European AI Act, which is already now partially implemented. So let's look at the risks that are coming from some small vulnerabilities, from some weaknesses of the system. So first of all, there is a huge common exposure. So meaning, as I already mentioned, if everyone follows the same news, follows the same influencers, the same trading signals, then we have so-called common exposure. Everyone is exposed to the same type of assets, same movements of the changes in the prices. The second point, of course, the illiquidity. So liquidity can be actually considered as some kind of illusion until it's really tested. So when we look at some rapid sell-offs, I mean, when the COVID happened, for instance, or there was some huge financial stress or large uncertainty in the market, of course, there could be some issues related to the liquidity. So in simple words, there is no other counterparty who would buy, let's say, the assets. So everyone would like to sell certain assets, certain stock, and so on. The third thing, in the modern financial markets, everything is kind of connected. So the brokers, the banks, institutions, clearing houses, and so on. So all the financial network is connected. So if there is a huge stress in one place, in one node of those connections, it's just a matter of time when it gets transmitted across brokers, primes, and other market makers, banks, and so on. So we can summarize it very simple. Let's say the loss of someone, of some institution, is a simple margin call of the other counterparty. Finally, the execution. So automated execution doesn't wait. So the algorithms simply execute the trades. The NLP AI simply acts when the signal is connected. Of course, all of those 4 points, they are not really a systemic risk. However, when we look at it as all of them together, they might create some kind of systemic weakness, systemic vulnerability. So I mentioned to you that I will go also to some microdata. So I will look at the data on the financial influencers. So here I would like to show you the newest research from our colleague from the Swiss Finance Institute. So they investigated the influencers, the finfluencers on the social media. They checked approximately 300,000 of accounts. And what's mostly interested, so they found out that only 28%, actually 27.5% of the influencers are skilled ones. So in simple words, following their updates, their news, can bring an actual value. So we can really profit from this. Other ones, so the 16% unskilled one and anti-skilled one, 56%. So basically, they provide some signals, but there is no value added. So there is no abnormal return generated following those influencers. Just a small clarification, this is only about the correlation, not causation, which means that the influencers don't really drive the market. It's just the correlation here. If we look at the returns, at the abnormal returns that the alpha generated, that we are clearly interested in, so of course the skilled influencer have higher returns than unskilled one or anti-skilled one. Here on the graph, we can see that in average, the skilled influencers, so people who really have the knowledge, that really have know-how to advise, to recommend the stocks, they generate 2.6% extra value, while the anti-skilled one generates minus 2.3%. So we can go to the conclusion that the engagement is inversely related to the skills. It's quite surprising. So here on the graphs, you can see the relation, so the probability of being skilled, unskilled, and anti-skilled one with relation to number of the followers and the activity, so how frequent those people publish the post, how frequent those people share some updates. So first thing, what we can see from the graph here, that more followers means the lower skills. So simply, the people with higher number of followers, they usually provide lower quality information in terms of the trading, in terms of prediction of the stock market. Similarly, the activity, so the more activity, so the more the person posts, the more info they share, the lower probability this person is a skilled one. So more posting, simply lower skills. When we look on the right-hand side, so the anti-skilled one, unskilled one, so the other relationship, so those influencers, they simply need the fame, they need the reach. So more activity, more post, but without actual value, added for trading. So first of all, we have so-called principal agent gap. So most, by the definition, so most those influencers, they want some clicks. So they want activity, they want more followers and so on. And investors are clearly interested in getting some returns, making money and so on. So there is a clear difference between what one counterparty wants, what the other wants. The second conclusion, so the visibility is more price, more appreciated than the skills. So it's all about the platform's reach, the number of views, not about the accuracy. Finally, there is the inverse correlation that was just showed on the previous slides. So more activity, more posting simply indicates lower skills of those people. So on the graph on the right-hand side, there is basically 4 cases. The ideal case, but rare, so high engagement, high skills, people who publish a lot and also have high skills. So this would be advised that investors follow those people. Unfortunately, it's a very rare case. Undervalued, so good guys, but still quiet, so they have high skills, but they don't post a lot. On the right-hand side, people who have low skills, with high engagement, meaning with high activities, this might lead to some problems generating false signals. So it's the highest risk, the anti-skilled voices, and the low skills and low engagement, simply some mostly irrelevant noises. So basically, this creates some kind of closed self-reinforcement engagement cycle. So this is the explanation why it cannot work. So of course, activity drives followers. So the more we post, the higher visibility, the audience grows, and so on and so on. And this causes so-called herding, so algorithmic herding. So followers simply follow the popular traits, follow the influencers, and this amplifies the momentum. There is also so-called echo chamber, so people tweet, share the same news that really don't bring value added. And finally, in the end, so the engagement is rewarded, so all the platforms, so the Twitter, X, and all the social media, they are simply optimized for clicks and shares, so not really about the accuracy. So nobody really, so at this stage, nobody really cares about the content. The value added is all about the quantity. Cool. So look at the automated trading signals. How does it work? Some use case. So here there is some post happening that is then prioritized by the algorithms. Of course, the larger influencer, the more audience is then promoted. Then it's boosted by the bots. Some coordinated action, coordinated behavior, simply by sharing, by promoting this message. There could be also the deep fakes. Actually, there is created some synthetic media, some kind of deep fake, which could have impact on the investor action, which is here. If you look at from the, let's say, trading side, implementation side on the right-hand side, so we have NLP methods, machine learning methods that scan continuously all the social media in real time. So if there is a signal to buy, to sell, to interact with the market, this can happen depending on the model in milliseconds, automatic execution of the trade. But there is no verification, no human verification. So of course there is some automation bias because there is no control, there is no check of this trade. And of course, once again, we have the same issue, shared models, crowd trades, and the model crowdings. Because if everyone follows the same methods, the same LLM-based NLPs or same AI-based methods, this will create some similar traits. In terms of the, so I just wanted to show you with this slide that this kind of deep fakes and the rapid reaction of the market is not just a hypothetical case. There are a couple of cases that it really happened. Maybe you remember from 2013, the so-called Associated Press Twitter hack. So some hackers hacked the AP account and posted a false fake picture about the attack on the explosion in the White House, which caused a huge drop in the value of the Dow, which is the US index, by 143 points. So basically 136 billion of the market simply wiped out, disappeared. Another case, another example, a picture of the AI Pentagon, so AI Pentagon explosion. This caused just some kind of volatility, some unexpected volatility. Of course, it was verified with the human verification. However, this whole act, I mean, this deepfake, caused the real market volatility, so the price changed. Of course, there are future risks, which I'll be talking about. This was, let's say, quite small examples, not really coordinated at this level, but let's say if we include that behind such attacks, behind such deepfake, would be a whole country, so the whole system of the bots, for instance, Russia or China. This could have an enormous impact on the stock market and on the financial stability. So let's look at some geopolitical AI influence. So of course, two main countries that are active in this field. So of course, Russia and China. It's already proven by the research, it's proven by researcher, by investigation, that both countries are highly involved in this. Of course, Russia has state-backed AI disinformation, deepfakes, there is the whole bot network, amplifying geopolitical and economic narratives. Their main goal is just to create some instability, to change expectation about the sanctions, energy, and so on, so just to cause some kind of fear. On the other hand, China, of course, they mostly promote China-aligned narratives to undermine Western trust. An example of some network, for instance, Spamouflage, so they simply shared many fake news, especially about the COVID. So it's also proven in the report, so how the People's Republic of China amplifies Russian disinformation. So there is a clear link between Russia and China. They work on this together. They support each other in spreading the disinformation and the fake news, depending in which country, in which geographical location, which country has a higher impact and a better transition of those fake news. So basically, this slide is supposed to summarize this whole narrative. So the AI bots and the deepfakes, they don't really change the whole politics at once. However, if it's a coordinated attack with the numerous network, I mean, with numerous influencers involved, this can create some social signals. Some might be stronger, some might be weaker, but they can be translated into the trading and risk models, which basically then, if it goes through, this leads to some market movements. I mean, to the transaction of the banks, investment funds, and the investors. In terms of the regulation, because I mentioned that I'll also address this point, so the European Union acknowledged this fact, acknowledged that there is such possibility also combined with the market narratives. So the European AI Act regulates so-called high-risk systems. So for instance, the credit scorings and credit worthiness is subject to some strict requirements. Also the profiling, especially the profiling, is included in this regulation, and it's under, let's say, a special observation. The second thing, of course, GPAI, transparency. So general purpose of all AI systems must be clearly documented, so all the capabilities and the risk mitigations must be documented. Finally, the last thing, so let's say if we have some large-scale models, so large-scale GPA requires adversarial testing and the whole incident reporting. Sorry, that was supposed to be backup slide. Okay, so let's go now to the project. I mentioned that we developed the project at Oxford together with some hedge fund from Texas. So it's about the AI-driven social media market signals. So in the first stage, we obtained the data from different social platforms, from the TikTok, X, the tweets referencing to some stocks, referencing to some keywords, like stock, trading, investing, and so on and so on and so on. This is our initial database, so that's where we start from. Using this data, we create on our own the list of these financial influencers. However, comparing to the, let's say, other approaches, comparing to other existing solutions, we focus here on the content filtering. So by applying some dynamic filtering using the followers, activity patterns, combined with large language models and the digital twins profile, digital interviews, we are able to distinguish who is an actual financial influencer. So basically, coming back to the first slide that I showed you, we are clearly interested in the financial influencers, in the guys that don't share the fake news, they don't share the disinformation, they share clearly the information that are relevant for us. Then the whole text, the huge amount of the text, using the AI engine are converts from some unstructured post into the structured views, for instance, the sentiment, market sentiment, and we generate the so-called trading recommendations. So basically, we get the ticker, we get the company name, and the buy-sell direction. So with a couple of additional factors like the speculation score, how certain are we about this trade, and about this trade, so buy or sell that certain asset. Then it's simply mapped, to the intraday returns to compute the alpha and the returns. So basically, in simple words, it's applied to the real use case. We simply put the trades on the market. And yes, and there is, of course, some kind of graphs out of this, graphical illustration, and so on and so on. So let's start with the influencer accuracy. That's kind of interesting finding for us. This is for the full sample, so that the red bars report the buy sides. So when the influencers recommended to buy, you can see that in the initial sample, the returns are just slightly positive, which means that we require some additional work in terms of clearing the data, in terms of removing some let's say, fake financial influencers. However, what's extremely interesting on this graph, you can see that the short trades, meaning someone recommends you to short sell certain assets. So basically, in simple words, making money on the stock prices when they go down. So it's called short selling. So we can see that the short selling recommendations are usually extremely positive, meaning that the short selling is usually recommended by the people who really actually understand the markets. Because let's say if we ask some investor, like, do you know how to do the short selling, how to short sell Tesla or something? Of course, most of the people are not aware of this. So this is an indication that the short selling is reserved for the highly skilled, highly proficient financial influencers. So let's go to the final conclusion, let's say. So building based on this analysis, so using the market narratives, using a bit of AI behind this. So we rank the influencers by the actual market prediction accuracy and the trading performance. So we build basically a portfolio of top 20 skilled influencers, equally weighted. So let's say every one of them gets $1,000, and let's see how much money we can make out of this. And we just do the decisions. So that's our new strategy. Nearly 3 weeks, we managed to make 9% return from this strategy, simply following our procedure, so the cleaning procedure, removing those, let's say, useless influencers in our opinion, and just trading, just following those top verified influencers. The last application, the market sentiment. So you might be aware that there is different, let's say, agencies asking some people about the market overview, so about the recession, how the stock market is performing. This we also do. So for instance, we classify using the AI agents, for instance, the view on the sentiment, so the general sentiment, bearish, natural, bullish, so what they think about it. The second one, so in the next 6 months, do you expect, so the AI agent expect if the stock market will go up, down, or stay the same. We compare those results they are a bit, actually, they show a bit of early shift ahead of traditional service. So basically, with those AI agent and the Twitter market narratives, we managed to benchmark against those top, let's say, top service AAA and Gallup sentiment indices. So I think that would be pretty much everything for today. So just a brief, maybe summary. Yes, so there is a huge difference between the skilled, unskilled influencers for the financial markets. There is a entirely new risk dynamic in the financial market. This can be also combined with some geopolitical risk. I showed it with an example of just of the trading, making some decision on buying the stocks. However, if we extend it to some massive disinformation, combine it with a larger, let's say, network of bots, let's say behind there is a country involved, then of course this would create a substantial systemic risk for European zone. And yes, of course, the narratives move faster than the verification. So if we rely entirely on the algorithms and on the AI and NLP application, this might, of course, increase this risk. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, so I think we can conclude now. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening, and then...
Szanowni Państwo, to w ten sposób dobrnęliśmy do końca naszej konferencji. Chcieliśmy Państwu bardzo podziękować za udział, przede wszystkim naszym wspaniałym prelegentom, jak i gościom oczywiście, zarówno tutaj stacjonarnie, jak i zdalnie. Dziękujemy za to, że byliście dzisiaj z nami i oczywiście zapraszamy do dalszych interesujących i ciekawych rozmów w kuluarach. Dziękujemy i do zobaczenia.